Excellencies, moderators, speakers, panelists, and distinguished participants. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to the second day of this Malaysia-Australia Dialogue Series on Combating Marine Plastics Pollution 2022, focusing on waste handling, materials recovery, and advanced recycling for a circular plastics economy. Before we start, we would like to invite all the speakers and panelists for a group photo. If you don't mind, please turn on your video. And smile at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, once again, and smile at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. And now we are pleased to have you for the third session today, entitled Extended Producer Responsibilities and Industry Agreements. Without further ado, we welcome Dr. Craig Miller from the University of Queensland, Australia, as our moderator for this session. The floor is yours, Dr. Craig.
Thank you very much. Selamat petang, selamat datang. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to part 2 of the second dialogue in this series. Yesterday we started with looking at some of the strategic and policy and regulatory frameworks for creating a circular plastics economy. And we also looked at some of the processes and means for both the collection and source separation and arrangement of plastics in order to get to the recycling stage. This afternoon, we're going to cover 2 things, the extended producer responsibility and advanced recycling, which will follow very nicely on from yesterday. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Ms. Pauline Goh. So in February 2021, Ms. Pauline was appointed as General Manager at the newly established Malaysian Recycling Alliance Berhad, MAREA. MAREA is the first voluntary extended producer responsibility organisation in Malaysia to push for post-consumer packaging waste recycling for the fast-moving consumer goods sector. Pauline has had a very successful career in leadership in the telecommunications industry and in Invest KL, an investment promotion agency under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Amongst other things, Pauline is the Vice Chairman of Swiss Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, Vice President for the Belgium Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce Malaysia, and Vice President of Sedang Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So she's going to be talking to us today about MAREA and the work that they are doing to drive plastic recycling in Malaysia. The floor is yours, Ms. Pauline. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Craig. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, let me share with you today about MAREA, and our voluntary EPR journey in Malaysia. Okay, so the topic of today, session 3 is extended producer responsibility. Yeah, so I'm sure you have covered quite a bit what is EPR. So that means that as producer, we need to be responsible, for the end of life of a product. So we represent the FMCG sector in Malaysia. So the end product will be the packaging waste. So we are here to tackle the post-consumer packaging waste issues in Malaysia. So how are we going to achieve that? So we need to work with the whole industry, from the consumers, the waste collector, the recyclers, and the most important of all, our government. So on the government side, there is a few things that has been mentioned about EPR. So it started off with our Child Malaysian Plan, covering from 2021 to 2025. So under Chapter 815, EPR was mentioned under Circular Economy Chapter to help elevate, removing all this waste from the landfill to be recycled. Secondly, we have also the Ministry of Environment and Water, in Bahasa Malaysia it's called CASA. They launched the Malaysian Plastic Sustainability Roadmap 2021-2030 in December last year. I'm sure yesterday the representative from CASA would have also covered that. So under the roadmap, we are looking at having EPR for plastic packaging to be mandated in Malaysia by 2026. And the last ministry who's looking at EPR is Ministry of Housing and Local Government. So at the end of last year, this ministry, KPKT, for short, has announced the setting up of a National Circular Economy Council. And also they would like to develop a national circular economy blueprint for solid waste by 2024 to have EPR implemented in Malaysia for 6 types of solid waste in 2025. And definitely plastic is one of them. So when did we start? When did we start our journey? So we started, in fact, back in 2019 by these 10 founding companies, because they understand that all this packaging is issue is, it's really bad for the environment. And all of them has experience in Europe, in the, other Asian countries about having EPR in those countries. So they come together to start a voluntary EPR in Malaysia. So the 10 founding companies are Coca-Cola, Colgate, Dutch Lady, Etika, F&N, Mondelez, Nestle, Tetra Pak, Spritzer, Unilever. And we took about, so we set up officially on the 4th of January last year. And we took about a year to formulate our business plan. And this year we go all out to invite other members to come and join us. So we have 2 types of membership. One is the main contributors that form part of the obliged industries, like the brand owners, the importers, the retailers with their own brand, and very importantly, the e-commerce companies. And for non-obliged industries, everyone can join us under associate contributors. As you can see on the right, we have Every Denison, Dialog, Mako, MCC Label, NGR, Toyocam, and Veolia. So what is our approach, EPR approach in Malaysia? So as mentioned, we are voluntary. So we hope to find the most cost-efficient and effective way to collect all this post-consumer packaging for recycling. And definitely we need funding. So we collecting, voluntary EPR fees from our members. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to be a waste collector. We don't want to operate a buyback center, nor a drop-off center. Neither do we want to be a recyclers. So we are just a platform. A PRO, Producer Responsibility Organization, to glue everyone together to make sure that all the post-consumer packaging waste are collected for recycling. So we have we took about a year to develop our EPR position paper. So for those of you who are interested in our position paper, please refer to our website. What are our objectives? So we came up with 4 objectives. So number 1 is we aim to reach a minimum recycling rate of 25% of members' packaging volume by 2025. So this is in line with the Malaysia Plastic Sustainability Roadmap, target number 2, whereby they mentioned that they want, 25% of the plastic packaging in Malaysia to be recycled. So for Maria, we are not looking at only plastics, we're looking at multi-material. And our objective number 2 is to maximize the use of recycled and renewable materials. And number 3, which is very important, is to promote separation at source for every household. This is the only way for us to achieve packaging circularity, which is our ultimate goal. We want, achieve bottle to bottle. And number 4, we want to prevent all this packaging leaking into our environment, especially our landfill, and also, the rivers and ocean. So how do we combat marine litter? Let's do EPR. Like I said that, but the home, every home must do separation at source. So how are we going to achieve these 4 goals? So let's look a little bit at the landscape in Malaysia on waste management. So on the right side, you have the green states the gray states and the blue states. So the green states are the states that has enforced separation at source since September 2015. So there is already an infrastructure for 2+1 collection per week, by the concessionaire. And the gray states, unfortunately, they don't want to follow the new Act 672. They stay on the old Act 171. So there is no infrastructure for recyclable collection, except for Penang, who came out with their own bylaw for separation at source in 2016 and enforced in 2017. And Sabah and Sarawak is still a bit, on their own. They have their own ordinance, so they have not enforced separation at source yet. So they are looking at, implementing them, in the near future. So given the three waste management, scenario in Malaysia, so Maria, we have formulated the three models of collection on the left side, to achieve the 4 goals that, in the previous slide. So our model 1 is curbside collection. So for the gray states I've mentioned, there is no infrastructure. So we'll be doing curbside collection in the gray state. So we are about to start a pilot project in Kajang for 10,000 households. And model 2 is sorting. So if you look at the green states, they already have the infrastructure of recyclable collection. So what we plan to do is to work with the 3 concessionaires in these green states to support them in sorting and transport, and very importantly, consumer education and public awareness. Sadly, in Malaysia, so if you ask or interview the green states, the households, a lot of them still don't know about their responsibility for separation at source. So this is a key component that we will focus in our model 2. And our model 3 is to work directly with the recyclers. So in Malaysia, in that sense, we are quite lucky. Recycling industry has been very established, and that is going to be covered by Dato' Johnson shortly in his presentation later. So we are looking at subsidizing the informal sector, mainly the informal sector or the formal sectors, on the feedstock that they sell to the recyclers. So like I mentioned, for Maria, we are not looking at just plastics. So we are looking at multi-material. So we'll be collecting all the 7 types of plastics, the used beverage carton, the e-commerce packaging, the food and beverage packaging. In Malaysia, we call them the tapau packaging, and the paper, the glass, aluminium, and also metals. So this is our journey. Like I said that Maria, we are still quite new. We were only incorporated on the 4th of January last year. We had our soft launch on the 1st of April this year, and our official launch on the 21st of January, witnessed by 2 ministers, the Minister of Environment and Water, and also the Deputy Minister of Housing and Local Government. So we are now in the midst of carrying out our pilot projects. So I forgot to mention on the model 2, actually we are having a collaboration and carrying out our pilot in Pulau Langkawi, on a mini EPR. So, and that one we work closely with the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, and together with SW Corp and then the local concessionaire Idaman. So what we hope to get is to get more of the obliged industries to join Maria in our journey, so that we have the funding to expand our pilot projects to other parts in Malaysia. So the last message for everyone in Malaysia, please do your part to separate your waste at home. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Pauline. It's really excellent to hear that perspective on how industry has taken responsibility. It's recognised the issue and is working together to actually address the issue. It's a big problem, and certainly we need industry to be a strong and key player in that. So it's really interesting to hear. So our next speaker, I'll just get to my notes, is Mrs. Meredith Epr. Ms. Meredith is the Head of Sustainable Programs with the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation. Now, APCO is probably could be regarded as the older sister organisation of MOREA. And so anyway, Ms. Meredith is head of the Sustainable Programs. She is a sustainability and communications professional with a speciality in marine plastics and the circular economy, and has postgraduate qualifications in marine ecology. In her role as head of Sustainable Programs at APCO, Ms. Meredith drives collaboration between industry, governments, and community groups to reduce the environmental impact of packaging. She is also the executive lead for the ANZPAC Plastics Pact, a regional solution working to create a circular economy for plastics in Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. ANZPAC is the second regional pact in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Plastics Pact network. She's speaking to us today about APCO's work in Australia. Ms. Meredith, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Craig and Ms. Pauline, for the fantastic presentations. It's an honor to be here. Like I said, my name's Meredith Epr, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which I join you from here in Sydney, Australia, which is the Gadigal land of the people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to those traditional owners, past, present, and emerging. So it really is a pleasure to be talking to you today a little bit about APCO, and especially how we work with the fast-moving consumer goods industry and how they're taking responsibility in this space. So Dr. Craig, I think you said it very well in terms of being maybe the big sister to Maria and some of the work that we've been doing here. So I'll talk a little bit about APCO, the Australian Packaging Covenant organization, and how we work with government and industry. Talk a little bit about how we create change. I'll do a really high level chat about the different programs that we operate, and then some of the outcomes and the next steps that we're looking to achieve. So how APCO works with government and industry. They've actually been around for about 20 odd years, APCO, and it's the Australian Packaging Covenant, which is a living, breathing document that's set out under regulations within the Australian federal system. But really, since 2018, APCO's taken on this more of a circular economy approach. So working through these 4 different pillars here that you see. So on packaging design, working really closely with brands. We have over 2,200 organizations.
Excuse me, Meredith, we're not seeing your slides at the moment, sorry.
Oh, no.
No.
Sorry, I must have not hit the button.
Sorry, I should have picked that up earlier.
There we go. Better?
That's it. Perfect. Thank you.
That's it. All right. So I'll just go back to this one, hopefully. So working kind of through these 4 areas around packaging design. So working closely with those 2,000 odd organizations to design their packaging. Then again, looking at the systems. So it's not just about designing packaging, but it's how does that packaging actually behave when it gets collected through curbside recycling systems? How does it behave when it gets to a MRF, or materials recovery facility? And then also looking at the end markets. So is there markets that actually want to purchase these different types of packaging back? Hopefully the internet's okay. Then we also work on education and that materials circularity piece. So looking at things like recycled content and traceability of that as well. So as I mentioned, APCO works really closely with the state and federal governments in Australia. We also work closely with industry, so being the waste industry, the packaging industry, as well as the resource recovery and different community groups as well. And then our members being brands, and that's anyone from your really large FMCG companies, you know, all of those multinationals that we would have seen similarly in the previous presentations, but also we do a lot of work with your medium and small businesses here as well. So we provide support and services to those organizations and also work in partnerships. So with members, we also work with all those different levels of government. In Australia, we have the different states and territories. And as I'm sure globally, we know things like single-use plastics and different bans are coming out. And often you'll see from one council to the other, different policies happening on that. So really working to bridge that gap between members and government on how do we design for different policies that are coming in and having the best environmental outcomes. Working closely with academia, community groups on consumer education, industry associations as well, and again, the waste industry. So in 2018, like I mentioned, APCO really kind of took this shift, focusing previously on the linear economy, and really trying to work more in this circular economy space. And a big part of that work that we do as well is to educate brands. And we think about the dialogue that's happening here around preventing marine pollution. And I'm an ocean girl, a surfer, diver at my heart. And at the end of the day, I think the work that APCO does that's so important is actually being able to turn off that tap, and by being able to do design out litter, and also creating a commodity for different packaging materials so that they therefore don't ever end up becoming waste or pollution. So how do we actually do that? Hopefully we can keep the lights on in our eco-friendly room, right? So how do we create that? In 2018, APCO launched the 2025 National Packaging Targets, and these were endorsed by industry as well as endorsed by the different levels of government here in Australia. The targets are aligned with similar targets that are happening globally, so it's always a bit of an argument or a friendly conversation with our friends in the UK of who had the targets first and the different ideas. But since then, these targets have been adopted in one form or another globally, which is really fantastic. So that 100% target of all packaging to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable, then supported by a 70% target of all plastic packaging to be recycled or composted, a phase out of problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic packaging, and then that really demand piece that's so important is a 50% average recycled content across all packaging. So metal, paper, plastic, glass, all of those different areas. And we've actually just been having conversations recently too around the targets, because we're about at the halfway point. It'll be 2025 before we know it. And how are we tracking, and have the targets really been effective? And I think for the FMCG sector in particular, and this for a lot of these big companies, been really helpful for them to be able to align to something that's being used globally, and they can then implement these into their own sustainability strategies as well. So making progress, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're tracking on that so far as well. So how do we actually get to the 2025 targets? We outlined in a strategy called Our Packaging Future, really 3 core focus areas. So again, around packaging is designed for circularity. One of the things that we've realized through these conversations is often brands, be it FMCG, whatever kind of industry you're working in, they didn't always have that full visibility of what was happening to their packaging. And I think especially after the China National Sword policy coming in, it really opened people's eyes to the transparency, but also the responsibility that brands have for their packaging at end of life. The next piece is around that improved collection recycling systems. It's very similar to what we saw in the previous presentation. It's a lot around source separation, and the cleaner the stream, the higher the value, and the more that really goes back into outcome number 3. So expanded markets for used packaging. If we have a nice, clean, high value stream, PET, for example, is in high demand. Lots of the big beverage companies have global commitments, and we're even seeing different regulations mandating recycled content. So the demand is really strong for that. So next, we'll talk a little bit about some of the programs that APCO runs. And these are the real vehicles in terms of how do we create some of the change. And by having different members participate in this, we're able to do this. So one of them that I could probably do a full hour presentation on, but I won't do that today, is called the Australasian Recycling Label, or the ARL program. And if there are any Aussies or New Zealanders on the line, you may have seen these little logos out on some different supermarket products. It is the Australasian Recycling Label. So we've been had the biggest uptake in Australia, but also working in New Zealand as well. And it is an evidence-based label around packaging recyclability. So it incorporates data around accessibility, how does packaging behave in the recycling facilities, and then end markets data to understand, does that all actually mean that this piece of packaging is recyclable? And the idea is, through these different labels, that it creates a really clear action for a consumer on all the different components of a piece of packaging. So if you were to take a box of chocolates here, and it's a cardboard box with this different loop, you would assume you could put that in your curbside recycling, in Australia, we have a soft plastics recycling scheme called Recyclable, where you can take your soft plastics back to store, so that return to store logo, and then the lid of this box would just need to go in the bin. And again, that idea is around the strategy to help really clean up our streams, educate consumers, but it's also been a really powerful motivator for industry, and you know, especially the FMCG industry, where they've really been strong advocates and some of the fastest to uptake this, because it's that check mark when you have a marketer who says, I don't want to put a bin logo on my packaging. That's not going to fly. And then especially if they're aligned back to those 2025 targets. So it's a really nice trigger for that packaging design and clear communications through different organizations. A second vehicle in which we're enacting change is through just the general APCO membership. So like I mentioned, APCO has been around for 20 odd years, has about 2,000 different organizations involved. And to become an APCO member, you agree to some certain obligations, and part of that's set out under the regulation. And that's an APCO annual report that you do each year. Something that we say often here is that what gets measured gets managed. And starting to just even understand what your packaging footprint is in the first place really helps an organization to reduce that, which has positive environmental benefits, but also can have really positive economic benefits as well. So we work quite closely with members, also using something that we've developed called the Sustainable Packaging Guidelines. Those are just 10 quick principles that are free. They're publicly available on the APCO website. It's just a really nice checklist for brands to be able to go against when they're designing packaging. Think about some key principles that will help to save on sustainability, potentially cost, and also help with some of those supplier relationships as well. The last program that I wanted to mention also is the ANZPAC Plastics Pact. So ANZPAC is the Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands Plastics Pact. Apologies for all of the acronyms in this presentation, but ANZPAC is part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Global Plastics Pact Network, the 12th Plastic Pact to join that network, and the second regional pact. So working closely within our region, we have over 100 different organizations that are committed, from retailers in Australia, lots of big FMCG brands across both Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, that are working towards a very similar set of targets that we have, the Australian national packaging targets, but specifically focused in on plastics. And I think this forum is really fantastic as well, because the conversations that we're having it's not just about Australia. We are all operating within this region, and even within Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, we know there's a huge crossover within Malaysia, within Indonesia, within lots of the Southeast Asian countries as well, of packaging that's imported and exported, and it's not always exactly a straight line. So having these kind of global conversations is incredibly important, and this alignment around sustainability and turning off the tap for plastic packaging getting into the environment. So quickly, I'll just mention a couple of the outcomes that we've achieved so far. So I mentioned the 2025 national packaging targets. This is a bit of a temperature check on how we've been tracking since the targets were announced. Again, over the years, where you see some of these numbers going down, actually, our data has gotten better. Better data sometimes means that the numbers are higher accuracy, but some of that number is going down. So in terms of design packaging for recyclability, roughly 86% of the packaging on the Australian market could be recycled, but it's actually getting lost in the system. So on that 70% target for plastic packaging being recycled or composted, again, only 16% of that is actually getting collected and having some kind of end market to turn it back into another material. We're tracking really well on that average recycled content for packaging. However, it's some of those low-hanging fruits like your paperboard and metals that are really carrying the brunt of this recycled content. But we are seeing lots of investment and lots of positive innovations in this space, which I think we'll hear from some more of the speakers later on around that. And same with the problematic phase out of single-use plastic packaging. We're seeing a lot more policies and a lot more alignment across the country in that as well. So just around the program impacts, the Australasian recycling label, again, you can see that it is making a tangible impact, and by brands engaging in these programs and communicating, and we've seen them also do lots of different consumer education campaigns and being really proud that they're actually putting the arrow on their packaging. But it's making a difference when someone's hovering over the bin. Should I recycle it? Should I not recycle it? So without the ARL, you see only about 19% of people are putting that soft plastics wrap where it should be going. With the label, 46% of people understand how to do that. And same with aluminium foil. The graph that you see on the other side there shows the APCO annual reporting and how our members have been tracking year on year. It is slight increases each year in terms of how they're tracking and reporting, which again is really positive to see these organizations tracking, measuring, monitoring. We give them feedback in terms of what are the specific areas where they can continue to improve every year and track that. Same with the different packaging that's being recovered year on year. So in 2019 and 2020, this actual recovery rate of packaging, although there's more packaging coming on the market, which makes sense, population growth, increased economic demands and whatnot, and especially with COVID, but seeing some of this happening, but more and more packaging is becoming recovered. So it's promising to understand that the system is working and we are making these incremental positive changes. So what's next? I guess looking at these three kind of core programs, ANZPAC Plastics Pact launched the roadmap back in July, and really getting into some of the targeted pilots and action phase happening now in the Pacific Islands and New Zealand, and working with Australian reprocessors here. Same with the Australasian recycling label. We have over 800 organizations that are engaged in the program now. It's really about continuing to make sure that the data is really nice and robust, and the evidence that supports that, as well as increasing that consumer education, and continuing that in the APCO side of things is continued engagement with government. We have a new government here in Australia as well that have a really great green agenda that they're working towards. So how can we best align that and really continue to deliver value back to all the different members and partners that we're working with to help reduce the environmental impacts of packaging in the country. So again, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to further conversations later today. Thanks, Dr. Craig.
Thank you, Ms. Meredith. That's fantastic. And it's really heartening to see the momentum that Australia has got through the work and the engagement of APCO with industry. And it's a momentum that can't be reversed. And as we were talking yesterday, we need to increase the scale and the rate, but we're on the way, and it's really good. And also it makes me think how important these sorts of dialogues are. You talked about it yourself, between New Zealand and the Pacific. This dialogue we're having with Malaysia and Australia now is really important. The work that Marais is doing, APCO is doing, there's lessons to be learned on both sides, and being able to have these conversations and share these things is absolutely fantastic. So thank you. Right, our next speaker is Dato Johnson Yoon. He is a veteran in the plastics industry, and he is here today representing two industry associations, of which he is an active member. The first is the Malaysian Plastics Manufacturers Association, where he is a committee member, and the Malaysia Plastics Recyclers Association, where he is the secretary. He is a contributing member to a range of government and industry technical groups and task forces seeking to drive the circular economy in Malaysia. In his spare time, Dato Johnson is also the managing director for Shaiguan Plastic Industries, a company established in 1997, which processes plastic scrap into recycled pellets. In 2010, a recycling bin designed by him and his team was adapted by Penang and the Selangor state governments to be utilised in public areas. Yesterday, we were talking about the amount of domestic plastics and imported plastics that contribute to the Malaysian recycling ecosystem. And Dato Johnson is going to be talking about that here today, about managing the domestic and imported plastics recycling in Malaysia. The floor is yours, Dato.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Craig, and very good afternoon to everyone. Firstly, just allow me to introduce a little bit about some backgrounds about MPMA and MPRA. Malaysia Plastics Manufacturers Association was formed in 1967. So we are 55 years old now, meaning that plastic been used, I mean, for long, but Malaysia's, we actually started to see how to actually to manage the plastics, especially for the producers, since 1967. MPRA, Malaysia Plastic Recyclers Associations, been formed in 2015. It's not too far away. Well, during that time, I think the world is talking about plastic recyclings, and we actually separate out from MPMA just to be alone, because recycling topics become very major topics to be discussed. So this is some background about MPMA and MPRA. Okay, my next slide is talking about how, well, first of all, I would like to emphasize one thing is like what I'm going to present is from industry players' view, and it's not representing governments. So this is how we feel in Malaysia when we're talking about managing domestic plastic waste. As industry players, normally we build in three parts. The first, we have industrial plastic waste, those waste from industry after the productions from plastic producers and etc. Well, second one will be commercial plastic waste. And the last will be the municipal waste from the household. As industry players, our major source for plastic scrap, basically from industry plastic waste. Reason very simple. As a mechanical recyclers, the scrap that we need or our fixed stock or our resource, it has to be clean and homogeneous. And industry normally can deliver that. Second point is we're talking about, this is definitely our major fixed stocks source, the recyclers. And from there, we also will get our some special plastics, engineering plastic like ABS, PS, PMMA, and etc. And we only can get those ABS, PS, PMMA, those engineering plastics, mostly is from industrial plastic waste. I will very confident to say that we believe that 99% plastic waste from industry being covered up, meaning that we collect all, we buy from them. So far as what we can build is like industrial waste, not the issue in Malaysia. Well, second part, when we talk about commercial plastic waste, as mechanical recycler, we always worried that the scrap that they deliver to our factory is contaminated. Well, for commercial plastic waste, I would say that still considered clean. Anyway, we're still teaching them, make sure just to clean up before you send or you segregate it. So commercial plastic waste at the moment is not our major fixed stock source. Okay. And commercial plastic waste, basically, majority will be container and packaging. And we will say it's mostly collected because retailers normally will pack it up and sell it off because it's money. So they're not going to throw it away. Well, the headache part and the major parts is municipal plastic waste or household waste. We will say that beside like PET bottles, those common plastic waste, most of our plastic waste from households contaminated. We believe that government, beside teaching our publics to segregate our waste, we also need to teach them how to clean it up. So you can't segregate it with a piece of beef inside your plastic container, which we can't use, or too oily. We will say it's semi-homogeneous. It's not really a homogeneous waste. So it definitely is not our fixed stocks beside PETs. PETs mostly is from municipal plastic waste, okay? And also the same from household waste is definitely normally will be containers and packagings. So this is how actually we see the plastic waste in Malaysia in these three particular field. So my next slides. As against, I don't represent governments. Against from the industry players, how we view what's currently happening in Malaysia. Well, for us, we think that what we should have in terms of domestic plastic waste management, after the solid waste collections, let's say, I will think that more particular, we're talking about household waste or municipal waste. After the collections, we think that we should have a MRF, material recovery facilities, so that you will segregate out metals, plastic, different type of plastic, to PET, to PP, to PS, and so on and so forth. After MRF, basically it should go to the following options. If very clean, homogeneous, it should go to mechanical recyclings, and then chemical recycling. Chemical recyclings, basically the requirements for their so-called fixed stocks is not as high as mechanical recyclings. So whatsoever mechanical recycling can't use, basically you can send to chemical recycling with certain conditions. Then the next one will be the RDF, the refuse-derived fuel, which actually will have lower requirements for the fixed stock. If above 3 can't be used, not the solutions to the waste, then the next one may go to waste to energy, incinerator, basically is that. So only after we try all the options and the waste still can't be resolved, then the only last option will be the landfill. But in reality, as industry player against, what we can see is like after solid waste collections, well, we have MRF. Basically, I believe that concessionaire will have their own MRF, but industry players may not understand or how actually they operate MRF, which we believe that some of the developed countries, MRF itself is an industry. It's not parked under concessionaire, it's not parked under recyclers or any others. It by itself is an industry. So that's the reasons I have to put a question mark over there, because I have no clear information about the MRF in Malaysia. And but what I know is like our concessionaires that they have some facilities maybe nearby to the landfill areas. So I only can put is a question marks. So as we are developing countries, we heard about few proposals about chemical recyclings, RDF, WTE, but we don't have any solid information about how Malaysia is going to carry on for chemical recycling, RDF, and WTE. As an announcement from our previous minister from housing and local ministries, they say that they should have an incinerator in each state. I yet to have any further information about that, which we think that we need to have that. When talking about RDF, I remember last time there's a company from Australia. They have their RDF center over here in Ipoh. But I've heard that I'm not so sure whether it's still under operations. So in conclusion, I only can say that, which very clear, the information that we have, basically Malaysia will have mechanical recycling. If those stocks not suitable for mechanical recycling, you go to landfill. I hope that if any government agencies over here, I hope that to prove it wrong. But however, from industry players, this is what we can see. Okay, my next slides. To support what I mentioned just now, why actually we should have various solutions to our plastic waste. Ladies and gentlemen, you can see that the charts that we're trying to explain. The first thing we're talking about the requirement for or the homogeneous or the waste quality that required for different industries, and also to versus the initial investment and the complexity of technicals. So everyone can see that mechanical recycling on the top. Mechanical recycling, yes, you don't need such a huge investment to start up. Okay, the biggest investment for us as a mechanical recyclers is we basically need to invest a huge sum of amounts to protect our environments, like water treatments, scrabbles, and all those things and so on. honestly, the machine is not that expensive. So, but the requirement, I mean, the cleanliness, the homogeneous for the source, the scrap that we need is very, very high. Okay. Then you can see the most left bottoms is landfill. Landfill basically have no requirements. If the land belongs to government, I believe that after the treatment, all those things and so on, I believe that that's the most easier way to solve the waste. The rest, you can see that chemical recycling, yes, you need a huge investment for that. And technically, it's not that easy to have a chemical recycling. Besides, unless that there's a research or any technologies transfer from other countries. Otherwise, it's not that easy to have a chemical recycling. The last proposal I've seen is basically talking about like nearly about 100 millions ringgit Malaysia to set up a chemical recycling plant. But as the on-hand information, there's few parties is looking into it. I involved in certain discussion with them. Of course, basically, chemical recycling is talking about where to get the feedstock. And chemical recycling is talking about like almost like 200 tons per day that the feedstock that they need in order to operate the chemical recycling. And the next will be the RDF and waste to energy incinerator. So this is what we're proposing to our governments to have a clear pictures about the plastic solutions that we believe that we should have. Mechanical recycling is there, landfill is there, but how about if you're talking about chemical recycling? And why we need it? Because different industry will have the different requirements for the homogeneous. We can't ensure that all our scraps cleans homogeneous. So what those mix, what those contaminated, which mechanical recyclers can't take, we don't hope that we direct go to landfill. We have other options like chemical recycling, cannot, RDF, cannot, WTE. So this is what we're thinking that we should have in Malaysia in order to manage our plastic waste. So my very last slides, we're talking about imported plastic scrap. Imported plastic scrap is a very sensitive topics to talk about. Well, back to year 2018, 1st of January 2018, always in my mind that China stopped importing all the scrap from the world. So no doubt there's a peoples that trying to divert the stocks to come into Southeast Asia, not only in Malaysia, but Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines. We had a lot of unknown containers, and it gives us a shock. For your example, for your informations, Malaysia started to have an import permit system back to year 2008, year 2008, 28. So for so many years, we have no problem to manage it, and we are taking it, those homogeneous and clean plastics. As I just explained to everyone just now, mechanical recycling, the quality of the scrap, we needed a very high qualities. So for so many years, we have no issues, and back to 2018, a lot of what we call it hanky-panky things happens until legal operators, well, just don't know how to handle. At the end, the interceptions from government, it stopped all the importations and found out that some actually, we don't call it scrap, but we call it rubbish from some other countries to Malaysia. As an association, we agreed we have to stop it immediately to re-examine back what we should do about the importation of plastic scrap. Well, after the incidents in year 2018, to get associations to discuss with the governments, and we came out with a few policies. We totally have about 19 rules and regulations if you want to apply for the approved permit to import plastic scrap. Well, these 19 rules and regulations, it cross over many government agencies, many certifications, and so on and so forth. So in Malaysia, at the moment, in year 2022, our policy is quite matured. A lot of things being controlled, well controlled. I will say that government is doing a good job. And but in the other hand, it's like you are not that easy to become a recycler. So this will be my first point when talking about importations of plastic scraps. As everyone knows, that plastic scrap transboundary being well controlled while Basel Conventions started in year 2021. 2021, 2020, I can't remember, but somewhere there. So after Basel Conventions, it's not only Malaysia controlling the transboundary or the so-called importations, the exporting countries involved in to make sure that only clean and homogeneous scrap are allowed to transboundary. This is one of the very success things that happens after the Basel Conventions. And just for your information, plastic scrap even is clean and homogeneous. If you want to come into Malaysia, all the containers will have officers to station at ports, Port Klang, Penang Port, and Johor ports. All the containers have to be inspected before it's allowed to come into Malaysia. So this is one of the additional enforcements that doing by governments. Well, if found dirty, contaminated, the consignee or the company that importing the scrap have to responsible to send it back. Well, by the way, once they found that your importations dirty, your approved permit will be immediately suspended. It's a very serious punishment. So up to 2022, this year, for the first 6 months, 7 months, I believe that is very, very minimum containers be blocked because of the contaminated. So I can't give an actual percentage, but we know that it's very, very, very low. Okay. Well, one more important point is like, as a plastic recyclers in Malaysia, especially those that need to import from overseas, governments need us to hire a competent persons who is certified persons to stations in our factories to monitor all our productions. So including that the rubbish that we need to throw, maybe some sludge that we need to throw, all have to be reported or controlled by the competent persons who is certified by our Department of Environment. So meaning that, yeah, it's higher under our company, but it's basically it's helping government to station in our factories to make sure that we're doing the right things. And as I say again, a company that who allows to import plastic scrap is become very sensitive. So because of the sensitivities, even my factories in 1 year, maybe about 4 times to 6 times, we'll have officers to come to spot check. And because as a sensitive industries, when they see that something is not right, they will seal your factory immediately. Stop operations, do whatsoever they instruct you to do, then only you are allowed to reopen. So basically, this is some efforts that by government and as well as the industry players when we're talking about the managing imported plastic scrap. Well, as my conclusions, I will say that as what Pauline just now mentions, Malaysia, we are talking about EPR. Now, of course, everyone is talking about ESG. We're talking about circular economics. Well, since we have some fellow colleagues from overseas, even I believe in Australia, I'm not so sure how's the developments of your recycling industries, but recycling industries, as I say, is a part of circular economics. And I believe that it's an important part, or we are playing an important roles for the extended producer responsible. So As I mentioned just now, chemical recycling need about 200 tons of fixed stock per day. So can Malaysia afford to have that quantity in order to operate a chemical recycling is a question mark. Mechanical recyclers, basically 1 month we can produce about like 1,000 tons. So together with government, we try to source it locally. But by real fact, we know that with our population is talking about 30 million, we may not have enough stocks to produce.
Excuse me, we're going to need to bring that to a close, just so we can get on with the next speakers, if that's okay, sir.
All right.
Yeah, terima kasih banyak for that, Dato Johnson. Yeah, thank you. That was incredibly informative about the challenges and the hopes for increasing the capacity in Malaysia to increase its recycling and processing of the domestic plastic stock. And I hope in the next session you'll stay around to listen to the next session when we do talk about advanced recycling, which will include chemical and some of those other technologies that you talked about.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Back to you.
Right. Our last speaker in this session before we move to the forum is Mr. Kieran Travis, who is Managing Director of an environmental consulting company called Harbach. Now, Mr. Kieran was originally scheduled to speak yesterday, but due to travel commitments, he's agreed to shift his talk to today. Mr. Kieran has held a number of positions in the public and private sector in waste management at senior levels. And in his current consulting role, he advises both the public and private sector. And today he's going to be talking about how he helps the private sector to navigate the sometimes tortuous waste and recycling regulations in Queensland. The floor is yours, Kieran.
Thank you, Craig. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that.
We can, thank you.
Okay. So just going to talk about obviously resource recovery in Australia and commercial and government matters. I'll just start my and so just going ahead. So my background, obviously, as Craig mentioned, is in environmental and waste management. I've worked across private consultancy, actually for the contractors, and I was also worked in mining and as well for government. So that's what we do, government sector and procurement, and we look at waste infrastructure projects in development approvals and project management. So this presentation is for about 10 minutes. We're going to talk about some of the background to the waste and recycling industry, some of the key features of successful projects, as well as some of the issues dealing with government. We're going to talk about some of the regulatory matters. And in my opinion, is that waste was a simple game. It was a simple game for a while. We just collected the waste and put it in the landfill, but it's made more complex these days, and rightly so. So as we mentioned in the previous speaker, he actually gave a good discussion about feedstock. You really must have a good bit of feedstock to make recycling work. So there's 5 key features, being feedstock, processing, offtake, which is the sort of infrastructure side. And then there's also 2 hidden ones, which we sometimes overview, is that people management. Anyone that's managed people in the past will say people management is pretty crucial, and obviously it must make money. So in feedstock, we must have sufficient quality and sufficient quantity of the product. The process, we actually talk about the actual infrastructure and the service, and the offtake, where does the product go? And governments love hearing that. When you lodge an application inside Australia or New Zealand, or many parts of Asia, people like to understand that you've actually thought about the whole process. So obviously with feedstock, ideally it's collected efficiently and then transported, then sorted. If it's sorted on site, fantastic. A lot of the time it isn't. It comes in Australia in our curbside collection system. Our recyclable waste is usually cardboard, paper, plastic, glass, tire, metal. In Australia, it's actually collected fortnightly and then transported to a recycling facility where the valuable items are sorted and reused, and there is some residual waste. So that's just a photo of a truck that's appearing at a site in Australia. It comes in mixed, And as the previous speaker mentioned, it's got to be sorted and comes in a homogeneous area, so you can actually create some value out of it. If it comes in mixed, you've probably seen that photo there. There's some contaminants, but there's not too much food waste in that, which is a great thing. So at the processing facility, the 5 key points here is the location, the size, the environment, integration, and I talk about the best option. We're talking about approvals and dealing with government, is the location is really important for everywhere. Is getting the approval from the government agency to build is actually a key issue. Absolutely. So the government will want to know the size, the environmental monitoring you'll take, because these can be dirty facilities, and most importantly, how you integrate with adjoining development. So obviously they're not a good idea to have them next to housing facilities or housing estates. So the best option is really to locate these in industrial zoning or at a former landfill site. And government generally thinks this is a good option because at a former landfill site, the community and industry are already viewing that area as a waste facility. So you're actually increasing the value of that land. So with the offtake, it's about where does the offtake and recycled product go after processing? What is it? Where is it used? And the governments like to know this. It's very difficult to get an approval when you say, okay, I'm going to build this site, I'm going to build a shed, I'm going to build a recycling facility. But they'll ask you, where is it going? Because they don't want to create another problem by giving you an approval. So in this instance, on the right-hand side of this photo here, that's just some plastic waste. Obviously, it goes through a better sorting facility, but this plastic waste can be used in roads. Okay, so that's a great analogy of saying we've got some recyclable waste, we process it, goes into roads. Not all plastic can go there. There's a lot of people a lot smarter than me on this call. But that's a great thing that the government looks at. So in some of the regulatory issues is generally in Australia, the local council, the lowest level of government, has the planning approval for the land, whilst the state government, not the Australian government, the state like Queensland and New South Wales, gives you the environmental approval for the license to operate. So the land is council, and the license to operate is the state government. Most times you need both. You do need the land approval and license to operate. If you have a smaller volume, that you don't need a license. So depending on the type of waste, the volume, and the location, the application process will take between 12 months and 3 years. So that's if it's, if you're favorable. If you put it into a location that's not favorable, next to residents or next to schools, you're going to take a long time to get approval for that area, if at all. So the key features of any application is really, as I mentioned, is the waste type, the volume, where's the offtake going, what's the construction methods you're going to use, is it prefabricated, is it building on site, what are the likely environmental impacts during construction. During the operation, you need to really look at the environmental issues during the operation, the social aspect, and also the traffic impacts, especially here in Australia, and I know in certain places like Singapore, is that if you have too many big trucks coming in there, creates problems for roadworks and all that sort of stuff. Then afterwards, you need to look at rehabilitation program. What happens when the site is actually filled or completed? How are you going to rehabilitate that? And the last one is absolutely crucial, is stakeholder engagement. How have you negotiated, or how have you advised the public? Which businesses are going to use this site? How is it going to integrate with the rest of the government activities? So they're the probably 5 key aspects of a good application. Following that is really that some of the government policies we've seen recently in Australia that are affecting this is that most recyclable waste was not processed in Australia, was nearly sent offshore. Then China and others said no more, as we heard from the previous speaker. There is a now banning of export waste. So the waste actually needs to be processed or recycled in Australia. And the state government wants more and more waste diverted from landfill. So therefore we need more recycling infrastructure, but that takes a long time to design and then operate. So really, if you wanted to start today, you're looking at 3 to 5 years to actually get a facility running. So how to make recycling work is really, you can make recycling cheaper, but this is very difficult to do because the capital cost of sheds, machinery, and labour all increase. And is there an market for the offtake? The government has recently, in Australia and all states, has introduced a landfill levy, as we've discussed before, and other presentations. That makes the operation of landfilling more expensive, but it makes actually the financial comparison for recycling cheaper. But as I keep saying, you really have to find a market for the recyclable and processed product. As I mentioned before, is that using plastic in roads or shredding tires or lots of other things, organic waste that can be reused. So probably in summary, my presentation is really, there's 5 key bits. Is the feedstock, the processing, the offtake, and more so the people and making it commercially viable. Government policies recently can enhance the market, can give you definitely direction, but also can hinder the market. I'd also advise people to be very aware of government policies because these can assist your application. So when you lodge an application and you say, well, we're solving some of the government's waste issues, that will enhance your application or enhance the chances of success. Negotiating with government is sometimes problematic, but it can be done. And then there's this last thing we like to talk about all the time is risk. And when it doesn't work out, problems like this appear, where there's infrastructure needed yesterday and you can't get approval to process it. So that's the problem with that. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Kieran. That was excellent, and was actually directly relevant to some of the and synchronises nicely with some of the things we've been talking about from our previous 3 speakers. So thank you very much for that. Yes, it is almost a case when people recognise, or governments recognise, that something needs to be done, but we should have actually started it 10 years ago in order to get these things happening. So it's like the old thing of when's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago, when's the next best time now, and we need to get these things happening. Okay, we're just going to move now to a forum discussion with our speakers. I'll get our speakers to put their cameras back on. Excellent, thank you, Ms. Meredith, Ms. Pauline, and Dr. Johnson. Excellent. Now we have a couple of questions from our participants in the audience. The first one is that there are a number of efforts happening in Malaysia to improve and create a green environment, and that there's a lot of effort going into recycling. This perhaps is for Ms. Pauline. What is the biggest challenge that Malaysia faces at the moment, given that that Malaysia, from the questionnaires perspective, is still a way behind Australia? What are the challenges?
Thank you for a question, Craig. The main problem here is SEPA, consumer education and public awareness. As you can see just now, in my presentation, I talk about the green states, the grey states, and also the blue states. So despite the green states, 7 states, out of 14 states in Malaysia has enforced separation at source. Unfortunately, no one knows about it, or less than 50% of the household knows about that. So that's why it's a big problem. So but then for the grey states and the blue states, definitely, they need to have the infrastructure. They need to enforce separation at source. So everything come together. So but very important is SEPAs, consumer education and public awareness on separation at source. If not, then it's very difficult to achieve what we want. A high recycling rate in Malaysia.
Fantastic. No, thank you for that. Okay, Ms. Meredith, I'll put the next one to you. There's actually 2 questions, but I'll put them into one. So what has been the reaction from industry in Australia to the requirement or the policy for recyclable packaging design? and so the industry response. And then what is the cost of getting the label on this APL label that you were talking about? What's the cost for doing that to a packaging producer?
Question, and I think it's probably been mixed in terms of the policy response. So it's worth noting that those 2025 targets for Australia are voluntary at the moment. And so I think where we've seen lots of businesses that are proactive or that have sustainability as a core part of their value proposition or already are resourced up to be doing some work in this space, they've taken it and are just running with it. Whereas maybe it's those medium or businesses that might not have as much capacity are finding it more of a challenge. And I would say too, we often have the discussion around voluntary versus you might see other targets being regulated in other countries. And there are pros and cons to that. I know in New Zealand, for example, they've kind of gone out and they're just regulating some of their different packaging initiatives. And that was because of feedback from industry where said it's just easier, especially if you're a multinational that's operating, and Australia and New Zealand is a relatively small market, and they need to make that business case back up to a head office somewhere else. If they say, well, it's regulation, you have to do it to be able to opt to play here, it's actually an easier conversation than saying, oh, well, we could. So I think it will be interesting to see where kind of the targets go in the future, and government's kind of response and interest in working with this further, and different community groups pressure as well. For the ARL, the Australasian Recycling label, that's actually free for APCO members to use, and we do have an international affiliate membership as well. So I can pop that into the chat. It's based on the size of a business. So smaller businesses pay a smaller fee based on your turnover, and then it goes up larger. Probably worth noting too, that's the label is based off data for Australia and New Zealand. So it's really only relevant in those countries. But I know that other organizations like RAP in the UK, and I think Singapore, are engaging with the organization that's called PREP, which is the Packaging Recyclability Evaluation Portal. It's like the online portal that houses the data. Then a brand can go on and type in all their packaging specifications. And so that could be of interest for the Malaysian industry potentially as well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so the next one I'm going to throw to Ms. Pauline and Dutto Johnson. We talked yesterday, and Dutto briefly alluded to it today, is that the informal sector that currently plays a large role in the collection of recyclable plastic from the waste stream, but this is an unreliable source of supply for Malaysian recyclers. So I'm just wondering about a comment about how EPR actions might affect the livelihoods of the informal sector and change the reliability of supply, whether there's any relationship there.
Do you want to go first, Dutto Johnson?
No, I think, Pauline, you may go first.
Okay. Okay. I mean, like this topic is, has been very much debated in Malaysia. Yeah, but I think we need to take it, one step at a time. Like you said, that we cannot come up with a policy, overnight. Yeah, you take away the livelihood of this informal sector. So the government, whether through CASA, a Ministry of Environment and Water, or KPKT, the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, this is definitely, on their mind, how we can actually transform the informal sector, to the formal sector. So I believe that for us, EPR, when we do all our pilots slowly, especially on our model 1, and 3, or all the models, if you want. If we need to deal with it, then we'll deal with it, at the local community, and then slowly we can, take it forward. Yeah. So it's very difficult if you just want to change that overnight. Yeah. It's very difficult. Yeah. Over to you, Dutto Johnson.
Well, I only can say, I think from last 2 weeks, we have a call from government agencies to understand more about these informal sectors. MPRA is arranging some discussions to understand that what we can do for informal sectors. We try to link them up together with the government agencies. And I strongly believe that Malaysia's government is it's towards how to actually to turn it to legalize it. So I will think that things in progress.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, Ms. Meredith and Mr. Kieran perhaps can comment on the containers for change in Australia. Have we seen anything with regards to, we don't have an informal sector per se, but we do have a homeless community and people that are in the lower socioeconomic groups that perhaps are using containers for change. Have you any data or information on how that's working?
Kieran, do you have any thoughts? Through to you first.
Look, the Container for Change program is governed by each individual states. So there's varying data. I can say that I've done some work for the Queensland team recently, and their target is 85% returnables. At 12 months ago, it was about 61% that they're getting. So in some areas, and Meredith can add to this, in some areas it's done very well. In some areas it hasn't done as well because it's very hard to get a blanket approach. And there's, the logistics. I can tell you that the research we did was found that in middle class areas it was doing well, in higher socioeconomic probably not as great, and lower not as great as well. And in some areas that sporting clubs were really doing well. Some development areas were doing well, but most interestingly, we found that in high rises, in multi-unit developments, it was really low, and same with office blocks, it was really low as well. And that's the reason being it's hard logistically to do it. Meredith.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think in the Australian system, because it's different every state and territory, and some of those are really advanced. So in South Australia, that program's been around for 40 years, and those behaviours are really ingrained. Anecdotally, one of our colleagues here grew up in South Australia, and she has a story of the lady, like you were saying, maybe who would always go around and do a bit of mining through other people's bins, and supposedly was able to buy her house that way. Who knows how true that is or not, but I think it's a big behaviour piece, and for some states they're well truly advanced in that, and then others aren't. I'll add to, I guess, with some of the work that we're doing in the Pacific Islands, this informal sector is really important and really interesting as well. And it'd be great to connect further up with the Malaysian team on that too, to see how that's being tackled kind of globally. Certainly an important area.
Excellent.
I think to add that, Craig, I think the success would be, it's got to be convenient. Got to be convenient for people to do.
Yeah. Because certainly there's I've seen both in Queensland and northern New South Wales, there are machines that you can take your bottles to, you put them in, and you can get you can get something a voucher that you can take to the local supermarket to get a discount on your shopping. Some places you'll actually get a cash refund, and certainly I've seen a lot of people taking shopping trolleys and big bags, having collected from the streets and the bins and those sorts of things to do that. So it certainly has a place in Australian society as well. Right. Oh, sorry.
Craig, I have a question for Australia. So do you have the percentage of how many of the states are doing DRS, deposit refund scheme, and how many states are doing curbside collection? Or it's up to states, whether you want to do curbside collection? How does it work in Australia?
I think it's every state or territory now has curbside coming out. I think hopefully I get my stats right, but it's Victoria's just coming out as the last one to come on across. Kieran, thanks, back me up on that one. So that's really good news. Like we said, South Australia's been doing it for a long time, and they've come on kind of slowly, which again presents challenges in itself, because then it's all this different administration for one country across the different states.
So it's not mandated throughout the whole Australia yet?
It's not run federally, so it's run by the different states.
I see. So it's up to the state to decide whether they want to do this or not.
Yeah.
And then I have another question for you, Meredith, because you were presenting just now about the 4 targets, on the packaging targets. And you mentioned that this is voluntary and it's not mandated yet, for the producers, to adopt all these things.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to make it mandatory?
It's a great question. That's $1 million question, at this point, they've been voluntary, and the previous government, we had Assistant Minister for Waste and the Environment, Trevor Evans, and he was, a phenomenal support in terms of really championing voluntary targets. And we saw previous examples that we had here were things like microbeads and face wash and body scrubs and things, and that was a voluntary phase out where industry were able to just kind of do it on their own. Who knows what the plans for the new government might be. We've APCO's role has been really to help monitor, help educate, and we've got the data in terms of where we're at now. If there need to be other mechanisms to be pulled over the next 2.5 years, I think we all really want to achieve these targets as well and make sure we're moving in the right direction. So we'll see what's to come.
All right, thanks.
I think further to Merida's point is that I'd say waste management is a generally old game in Australia. Recycling's a pretty mature game. There's still not things, but product stewardship and labeling is a very much a new game. And people, like from an industry perspective, everyone admires Merida's team, what they're doing. We're just not there yet. And it's almost like, I said to her another day, another webinar, it said, everyone wants to be innovative, but no one wants to be first.
Exactly.
True.
That's very true, Kieran, because we are also having, our challenge in Malaysia. As you can see that, we started off with the 10 founding companies. At the moment, we have 12. We have 2 additional. We just got 1 agreed to sign up yesterday, but it's a very slow process. So, unless we mandate EPR in Malaysia, then the whole obliged industries will need to do their part.
Excellent. Now, I know that we're going to have to wrap up in a minute. I can see Pak Aslam there sitting there, but I do want to ask one more question. Given that countries like Australia are taking increasing steps to create a circular plastics economy and to stop exporting their recyclable material, and Malaysia relies heavily on imports at the moment, if it all stopped, could Malaysia supply its needs from its domestic waste plastic stocks?
No, definitely not, Craig, not at the moment, I'm sure Dr. Johnson has more answer than me, because like I said, that my background, I'm new in this industry, I'm an infant in this industry, so I'm sure Dr. Johnson will have a lot of answer on this, definitely not at the moment, Over to you,
I just make my last inquiry when people saying that they want to have a factories to produce PET bottles. So I said that you go ahead to calculate your ROI, your returns of investments. And I said about West Malaysia's populations. In order for you to have a PET factories that you can produce about like 1,000 tons of PETs in Malaysia, meaning that every single persons, they have to throw about 1.5 liter bottles in order for you to operate a PET factories. One single PET factories to produce 1,000 tons of PETs. So when they ask me, I'll give these simple statistics. 1.87 pieces, 1.87 piece of 1.5 liters bottles, like Coca-Cola or any others. So a families of 6, you may need to throw about 8 bottles per day. So can we have it? Well, this is my answer.
Thank you, Dato. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you all very much to our speakers for this session. We will hand over to Pak Aslam, but I hope that you will all stay online as well to listen to what our next range of speakers are going to talk about. So thank you very much. Over to you, Pak Aslam.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Craig, for moderating the engaging presentation and fantastic discussion with all the panelists. Moving on to the next session, we are delighted to invite our second moderator for today, Ms. Cheryl Rita. She is the Research Fellow and the Head of Center for the Straits of Malacca at MIMA for Session 4. The floor is yours, Ms. Cheryl.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Aslam, for the kind introduction. I would agree and echo with Aslam on this. It has been an exciting session 3 with very impressive, discussions on not just the gaps, issues, and the needs to move forward. I think it nicely ties into what we've had yesterday, which was on discussing the strategic and policy frameworks. And then we discussed waste collection and handling. We have now heard about EPR, and we are moving on to the next theme, which is session 4 on contemporary and advanced plastic recycling. Now, all these themes that we have had over the last 3 sessions actually links back to one another. We're really getting all these details in, and some of it, although we are repeating what we're saying, it's very, very crucial to try to look into where the recommendations should be moving forward. For not just Malaysia, we are hoping that the recommendations will be useful for the region as well, because ASEAN is also looking into this issue as a whole, and Malaysia has been very active under the COPSI platform. So we're really hoping to bring this up, not just for the nation, but also for some of our other neighboring countries that might benefit from this discussion as well. Now, with that, I will very briefly lay out a background to this particular theme, session 4. Now, we heard since yesterday and today again that effective plastic waste management efforts, some of the speakers mentioned it has to begin from the basics. Some people mention, it begins from home. If you don't segregate the waste, it's not going to move from there and so on. And today we heard a bit more on the amount and so on. Now, specifically for Malaysia, I think there has been a lot of discussion, especially recently since COVID, where we're looking into how do we move towards comprehensive solutions to address plastics throughout its life cycle, from design to waste reduction, recycling to proper disposal at the end of life as well. Now, recycling is a core component, as we've heard, of efficient and effective waste management systems. Still in many places, we are hoping to derive the same for the nation, in Malaysia in this case. An advanced plastic recycling industry, we feel, will support effective sustainable waste management systems. Now, that is the background to this discussion. I must at this point also mention a very interesting paper, probably one of the only papers for Malaysia. It's titled An Advanced Plastic Recycling Industry for Malaysia. This is a white paper that was produced in October 2019 by the Malaysian Plastic Manufacturers Association and the Recyclers Association. We've heard from Ms. Pauline as well as Datuk Johnson earlier. Now, this paper is interesting in the sense of 3 key areas was highlighted: the need for wider collaboration, the importance to properly manage plastic streams and waste management, as well as the infrastructure, and the potential for plastic recycling to become a contributor to the economy. Now, this is where we hope to learn more from the Australian experiences on this. And you'll notice that all our 5 speakers for session 4 are actually from Australia. That's what we're trying to target here. Now, without further ado, I am happy to introduce you to the first speaker, Mr. Peter Barker. I will give a very brief introduction to Mr. Peter. From a diverse career in retail operations, business development, and franchising, Peter joined the company now known as Plastek Recycling Limited in early 2015. In addition to leading the business development of the e-wood product, Peter managed Plastek's R&D center in Manoa, New South Wales, until its planned closure in June 2021 last year. He has got a strong practical knowledge of the potential and operations of Plastek's mixer melter technology and overseas projects, including international joint ventures, sales, marketing, installation, and training support services. Peter is a board member and supports the management team with administrative, communications, sales, and marketing functions. We are indeed delighted to have Mr. Peter as the first speaker. I pass the floor to you, sir. I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you very much, Cheryl, for the introduction, and thank you for the previous presenters too, which have presented a number of the challenges, but also a vision of hope for work that's being done. I'm hoping that the next session, which I'm part of, will also assist with that vision of hope through letting know what options are available and future developments. So without further ado, I'll just introduce my presentation is just a very brief PowerPoint presentation on the technology that we're bringing to market, which is groundbreaking in many ways, because it's our biggest challenge is having people believe that we can do what we can do. So I'll quickly give you an introduction to our company, but I'd like to then have Cheryl play an introductory video that actually better describes the process. It's a visual. Hopefully it won't be too disjointed because of the tyranny of distance, and that it'll play well. But so I'll just share the screen, sorry. So welcome to Plastic Recycling Limited. Our slogan is that we've
Sorry, Peter, we can't see your screen as yet.
Okay.
Maybe unshare and then share again.
I will do that. Hang on. Share screen. How's that?
Yes, it's up now.
Okay. Just navigate my way away from this. There we are. Is that, we've got it now?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. So, sorry about that. Plastic recycling. We just solved the unsolvable is the our slogan we're going forward with, because I hope that what you'll see today actually is music to your ears as far as some of the issues that we've spoken about as far as commingled waste plastics. A quick introduction on the plastic mixer melter. The plastic recycling has developed an elegant technology coined the plastic mixer melter. It is born from a technology called poly-waste technology, which it'll be referred to in the video. But it's a system that's been devised to cost-effectively transfer low value, commingled and lightly contaminated soft and rigid waste plastics, what we've all been talking about, into a homogeneous molten feedstock, which can then be extruded into quality and affordable plastic products in one simple process. The plastic mixer melter involves a unique and patented process using mechanical frictional heat to simultaneously mix and melt used plastics so that the in-feed mixed materials, plastic waste, do not require washing, blending, drying, shredding, granulating or pelletizing beforehand. So all of those upstream processes for a majority of the plastics that we've been talking about is now not required. The process significantly reduces the handling and processing costs associated with in-feed material preparation and ultimately produces extrusion-ready plastics at an estimated 60% cheaper than conventional recycling methods. Now you think, wow, how is that possible? Well, it is. But what I'd like to say at this stage is that that plastic supports every effort to keep the value of any given polymer. There's a lot of investment goes into making plastic, and to only use it a single use before end of life processes like landfill or waste to energy or what is just we want to see the plastics, less plastic used, but used better and recycled in such a way that it maintains the highest value for that polymer. So introducing the plastic mixer melter, it's a Australian invention from Moama, designed to mix and melt plastics of all different polymers from 1 to 7 into a homogeneous substrate, which can then be used to make useful products. couple of quick stats, some of them are a little bit old, but the general theme is the same, that most plastics that get used have a single life and don't get recycled effectively. So it's around about 70% of plastics aren't recycled effectively. So we identify that as low-hanging fruit, and we estimate that 30% of packaging plastics and 40% of durables are readily recoverable. How we solve the problem? Just comparing the plastic mixer melter technology to traditional technologies. In the one pass or the one batch, we can recycle all different plastic types from 1 to 7. The technology can recycle co-mingled plastics without sorting. It recycles plastic with light contaminants, and you'll see in the video what some of those contaminants are. It recycles soft and rigid plastics independently or together. It accepts multi-layered packaging, and it effectively creates value for all waste plastics. It's a single cycle process and requires low investment in infrastructure compared to other technologies, as was discussed with Dato Johnson. It can easily be scaled up or down, so it can be used regionally or centrally in cities. It's energy efficient, and in its ideal application, it only melts the material once when recycling. So you can produce a product in one passing from the waste material through to a finished good. The product, all the products produced are recyclable using this technology again, and it effectively diverts all plastics from landfill or end-of-life processes. A quick overview. I'm hoping you can see that all okay. If we look at the waste plastics, in the traditional or conventional methodology, they have to go through a sorting process. Those which can't be utilised, find their way to landfill quickly or other end-of-life processes. But in order to prepare for recycling, they're either shred or granulated, washed, dried, put through an extruder, cooled, granulated, and then sold or stored to a processor, then generally mixed with virgin polymer, and then moulded into recycled plastic products. With the plastic mixer melter system, all plastics in that one feed can be sorted if you wish to get the highest value for those plastics, but generally for the plastics that can't be recycled is what we're targeting. So the upstream processes can be bypassed. The mixer melter uses frictional heat, so it's a low energy process, and without having to do all the upstream processes, it manufactures or makes a molten substrate ready for moulding a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently. So basically, from the plastic mixer melter, it gets dropped into an extruder, a conventional extruder, just to transport the molten substrate to the moulding station. A couple of examples that we've done in practical applications when you're looking for markets for recycled product. There's a few case studies I could quickly go through. There was a Kentucky Fried Chicken outlet in suburban Sydney that was having a lot of trouble with the curbing breaking up in the drive-through section. Large trucks and trailers were breaking up the concrete. We were approached to see whether we could make a plastic curbing, which we did. We were making car park bump stops. We moulded them into a curved profile, and those, whether they were breaking up, the concrete was breaking up every 3 to 6 months. It's been operating for over 4.5 years now, and it's still as good as the day it looks. So there are practical applications for the type of plastic that would otherwise have no other value. Surfrider Foundation, when we're looking at ocean cleanups, there were a beach cleanup based in Noosa. The plastic waste was separated, recorded to find out trying to establish the source of the plastic. It was all bunched back together, sent to us, and we made a park bench which we presented back to the council. Similarly to that, in Melbourne, the Yarra River there's regular cleanups conducted of the Yarra River. Once again, data was taken and we collected all the plastic and made a bench, and it was presented back to Parks Victoria. So our current status is that we have over 7 years R&D experience completed in Australia with a half-scale prototype. It's validated the process and we've had further validation of the process by independent testing sponsored by the international organisation, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. We have a joint venture operating in the Netherlands for ongoing R&D with particular focus on textiles, which is a big problem, polymer-based textiles. Full commercial scale plastic mixer melter design and engineering package has been completed. We're negotiating for our first commercial machine build and installation in Australia. We're in discussions with potential international clients in India, Indonesia and USA, and also in joint discussion for a joint venture in USA. So we're an emerging company now in the commercial side with a revolutionary technology that we're very proud of and we think has some very, very practical applications. So Cheryl, if you wouldn't mind now showing the YouTube video. I don't know whether I have to stop sharing.
Yes, please. Yes. And then I'll share now the video.
Okay. So hopefully you'll find this entertaining and informative, despite the fact that we didn't have a very good talent to do it.
As the world community struggles with the growing dilemma of waste plastics, the recycling industry is racing to find new technologies that can handle the wide range of plastic textures and reduce the waste stockpiles, and at the same time create new and useful products in the process. Recently, a new Australian invention has emerged, poly-waste technology, proving once and for all that this ultimate goal of recycling all 7 soft and rigid plastic types is now possible.
What we're bringing to market here is a new Australian invention which can recycle soft plastic films commingled with rigid plastics and other contaminants, even things like coffee cups. Most of those plastics are plastics that you would have typically in food packaging and in agriculture, and also commercial films such as pallet wrapping. They're best described as plastics you can scrunch in your hand. Those plastics tend to go to landfill because there's no inherent value with them because they can't be recycled economically.
We've been working in order to develop a solution for the 600,000 tonnes of plastic that is produced in Australia every year, and now, given China has closed its doors, we need to find a home for it.
The Plastech recycling process caters for domestic, commercial and agricultural waste plastics, and can also integrate a range of contaminants in the plastic recycling process, including foil-lined and multi-layered plastics, cigarette butts, paper coffee cups, paint and oil residue, even carpet tiles and running shoes. And importantly, the operating costs are much lower than traditional recycling processes.
What we can see here is a mixture of domestic waste, such as rigid plastic bottles, flexible films. All of these materials can go in one run.
This technology is fantastic for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's polymer agnostic, which means it can take any sort of plastic, from plastic bags through to grain bags, through to plastic off the dashboard of your car. So it's fantastic for those type of problem plastics that have found it difficult to be recycled up to now.
The plastic that comes out of poly-waste technology can be used in any number of applications. For example, low-cost housing products, garden beds, fencing, park benches.
Australia does not have a recycling problem, we have an upcycling problem. And so what we need to develop is the consumer and corporate demand for products made from recycled goods. And this is what this technology is allowing. This technology facilitates the next step of value-added products.
As you can imagine, any plastic that gets recycled in remote and regional communities has to travel hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometres, which adds a lot of cost and makes it uneconomical. The polywaste technology is a low-cost technology which can be used in those communities and produce local products from the local waste.
Waste plastics from agriculture, such as grain bags and silage wrap, have traditionally been difficult to recycle as they're often dirty and also need to travel long distances from the farm to the factory. Now, with Plastec's poly-waste technology, these waste plastics can easily be recycled close by and without further cleaning.
Mr. Peter, if in the interest of time, would you be okay with me sharing the link in the
Oh, please, yes.
Yes, but it gives a broad idea as to the technology and what's happening in Australia on this.
Yes.
Thank
you for that, Cheryl. I probably went a little bit longer on my introduction than I thought.
No worries. I'm going to quickly share it here right away. Yes, the link is right there, and I encourage you to see the rest of the video with a very informative presentation there as well. Thank you once again, Mr. Peter, for the very interesting presentation on this technology that's available in Australia, that's already now implemented, and how probably this could be further discussed later at the panel discussion at the end of this session. Thank you once again. We'll move on to the next presenter. We have with us Mr. Austin Ramage, who is the Group Manager for Sustainability at Martok Life Cycle Management, LCM. He joined the business in 2008, has been working on various production, technical and logistic roles before joining the sales team with a focus on business recycling division. During his time at this current position, he has seen the recycling business grow significantly to now encompass recycling facilities in multiple states. He has also recently worked on the company's education campaign, advocating for recycled content in all products to promote the circular economy in Australia. With that brief introduction, I pass the floor to you, Mr. Austin.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, let me try and work this out because I was having some difficulties. There we are. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes,
okay.
Perfect.
All right, so thank you, Cheryl, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Austin Ramage, and I'm here on behalf of the Martok Group from Australia today. I guess I'm looking forward to sharing with you a recycler's perspective on the challenges and opportunity in our market, and I hope that we don't cover too many of the same topics from earlier, but they're important as far as we're concerned. So, by way of a brief introduction about our company, Martok is a privately owned polymer trading, compounding and recycling business based in Melbourne, Australia. And as far as recycling and capacity goes, we market a range of non-food grade recycled polymers all the way through to food grade RHDPE and RPET, which we have a combined capacity of about 35,000 tonnes per annum. So I thought I'd start off today by giving a really brief outline as to what's happened in the last 10 years in Australia, because I think it's a really important story. And the reality is that we've had incredible change in the last few years. I think historically Australians have been really lazy recyclers. I think the perspective has always been that once you put your recyclable products in the recycling bin, the job's over. But the reality is that the situation is a lot more complicated than that. So for decades, we basically just baled together and exported mixed plastic waste. But when the China National Sword policy came into effect, along with other countries tightening import rules, we faced a waste crisis here in Australia. So through significant industry and government investment, we now have a lot of capacity coming online for traditional mechanical recycling technology to tackle the problem, and that's sorting, washing and compounding capacity. But interestingly, also we're seeing the emergence of new technology, particularly chemical recycling, and there's several projects on the go here in Australia that'll be interesting to see the development of over the coming years. I think finally, the other crucial part is the recent export bans put in place by the Australian government. And so what that's done now is that's forcing us here, forcing us to recycle here. And I think now more than ever, the question of what do we do with plastics once they're recycled is one that needs answering. So I have the circular economy map on the right-hand side, but I think I just wanted to touch on, from our perspective, what underpins a successful circular economy is that a robust waste management system or waste collection system. So I thought I'd cover up on the two different methods here, which I heard earlier was already covered. But so basically, we have curbside recycling, which is mixed recyclables in a bin, aggregated together at a material recovery facility and sorted from other products. So plastic sorted away from glass and aluminium and paper. And then the other method that we have are the container deposit schemes. Now, I think all of the states now have are moving towards these deposit schemes, but basically what they are is a levy placed on a beverage container before the sale, which is refundable to the consumer when they return the bottle for recycling. I think the key with the deposit schemes are that we're putting value on the correct disposal of a plastic item for consumers, which is a really important point. I don't want to take away from the difficulties of recycling or the knowledge that's held within the industry, but from my perspective, the single biggest issue is developing applications for recycled plastics once we've recycled it, we've compounded it and put it in a bag. So we have a huge job ahead of us re-educating Australians around the importance of the circular economy. And we always say that it's a collective effort throughout the supply chain, but we see the consumer as being fundamentally the most important part of this because it all starts and ends with them. So in Australia, we have the Australian Packaging Covenant organisation, and you've heard from Meredith earlier this afternoon, so I won't touch on that for too long, but one of the largest drivers forward in Australia as an industry are these 2025 packaging targets. But importantly, APCO also mandates that as brands and businesses that we're working towards these targets, and we have to report on this annually. I think really crucially though, recycled content into food packaging is not the answer. It's not the only solution. It's very important, but 50% average recycled content back into packaging still leaves a lot of plastic that ultimately we have to find other applications for. And last year we had the Remade in Australia campaign, which was really excellent. It focused on educating consumers around some of the other products that are made locally from recycled plastics and contributing to supporting the circular economy. So the next step after the waste management, getting the waste management right from our perspective is getting the recycling raw materials stream right. Now, the first challenge that we have to overcome is why are we using a particular packaging item in the first place? And we focus a lot on the waste hierarchy here, reducing where we can, reusing where we can, and recycling next up. But I have some examples here of plastic packaging. So for example, a multi-layer pouch, which is a lightweight alternative to rigid packaging. And of course, unfortunately, the plastic wrapped cucumber, which is used in every anti-plastics discussion. But some of these packaging products are really crucial in reducing food waste. And an emerging topic of conversation is greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprint. And I think something that people don't understand a lot of the time is that if food waste was ranked as a country, as a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, it's actually third behind the US and China. So design for recycling or compostability is the key. But I think what's really important is we're considering overall sustainability of the product that we're trying to package as part of the offering to consumers. So just one other thing I wanted to touch on quickly is the packaging recyclability evaluation portal or PrEP tool. And that's a really important part tying in with the standardized Australasian recycling label. And basically, the result of this is that you have to go through the PrEP tool to display that your product's recyclable on your packaging. it makes it really easier for consumers to understand what to do with the products once they're used, whether they're recyclable, compostable, or not. I think one of the biggest questions that we get asked day to day in our business is around the cost of recycled content. I think that the reality is for mechanical recycling and probably chemical recycling as well, back into food grade polymers, is that there's costs associated with the collection, the sorting, the washing and processing, and there's also issues with scalability of a recycled plastics plant versus a virgin plant, and they're unavoidable, meaning that ultimately it does cost more. But I think it's really important to look at the overall cost to the consumer though. And I think we have to consider that if a container costs a few cents more for recycled content to facilitate a circular outcome, then I think you could argue that the container is undervalued to begin with, because we can't take all the benefits of using plastic and all of the cost benefits that come with it without being responsible for the end of life. So if we do nothing about circularity and about fixing this plastic waste problem, I feel really strongly that there's so much negative stigma around plastic waste and environmental issues. And I think that there's a real risk that it leads to deselection for plastic without looking at the bigger picture around overall sustainability. For example, it's often asked why we don't just go back to glass. And I think the reality is that plastic's an incredibly efficient packaging medium. You know, there's so many efficiencies in regards to lightweighting, transport efficiencies that come along with it, and the net carbon footprint versus glass. You know, there's a reason why we're using plastic in the first place. We just have to get that recycling part right. Another term that's thrown around a lot is downcycling, which means that we're not using plastics back into the original product like we are with, say, bottle-to-bottle PET recycling. But I think it's really important to remember that downcycling is not always bad, because the reality is that there are many long-term and durable industrial applications that are well established. And if they're not using recycled materials, they'd otherwise be using virgin polymers. So that's an important point as well. I think just to finish off with where the opportunity is, I think one of the biggest opportunities we have in Australia is to develop local markets for these materials once recycled. And this really has the potential to create jobs and added value to the Australian economy, which I believe would be equally true in Malaysia. And this is our biggest challenge looking ahead. I think whilst we have lots of brands, businesses and consumers embracing the circular economy, it's just not enough as things stand today. So consumers also are wanting their brands to be more sustainable, and they'll shift their purchasing decisions accordingly. And if that means away from plastic because it's perceived that there's a plastics waste problem, then I think that's a real risk. So in the short term, I think we can offer differentiation by having, you know, sustainability, recycled content in our packaging. But longer term, we have to show consumers that our businesses are serious about sustainability. Another topic that gets thrown around a fair bit is whether regulatory control is required to drive recycling. You know, it's often talked about whether mandatory recycled content is required. And whether that's the right direction or not is a vexed question. I think the reality is that even in developed recycling markets, for example, Europe and even the UK, where there's levies or taxes on non-recyclable plastic or products not containing recycled content, there's still calls for this mandatory recycled content. So, you know, we're still not quite there yet. I think finally, one of the key takeaways from all of this is that the consumer choice is really key to the circular economy from our perspective. We have to educate consumers to look at the bigger picture, and they have to make sustainable choices in their home and their work lives. But we have to be educating the consumers of tomorrow as well, because we're talking about generational change here. Transitioning from a linear economy to a circular economy is going to be key in preventing waste from ending up in landfills or the environment longer term. But I feel really strongly that it's up to the plastics manufacturing and recycling industry to lead the way here with positive steps towards sustainable practices and sustainable and positive messaging. Because I do really believe that even being involved in these conversations is a great step, and I really am confident that we're contributing to positive change. So I'll leave it at that. I really hope that there's been something of interest for you. It really is a complicated topic, and there's no easy answer. But thanks again for the opportunity to speak to you all today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Austin, for that. I do agree. It is a very complex area to cover, and I believe all these experiences that we're seeing from Australia is going to be very beneficial for the challenges and gaps that was also highlighted at session 3 for Malaysia. Particularly interesting points that you've raised on whether there should be a mandatory recycled content, where most of the discussions has been very much on voluntary. And that's also the case in Malaysia. But towards achieving what we're trying to achieve here, towards a circular economy, do we make certain things mandatory? That's something to think further. You also touched upon how this contributes back to addressing GHG emissions and carbon footprint, and looking at current targets, not just the circular economy, but we've also got targets to reduce GHG emissions and addressing climate change and stuff like that. So all these cross-sector environmental efforts is another thing that we should be considering when we take actions on this area. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Austin, for that. We will keep the discussion to the end of this session. We'll move on to the next presenter. We have with us Dr. Nuno Padaha, researcher at, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, can I say Epr Leon? If I'm saying that.
That's how we say it normally, yeah.
Fantastic, okay. Based in France. He has a background in reaction engineering with a particular focus on the optimization, fundamental understanding, and development of catalytic processes for the conversion of mixed plastic, agricultural waste, and hydrocarbons. At his current position, Dr. Nuno develops catalytic processes for waste to chemicals. And at UQ, so I see that you're also attached to UQ, his research activities will focus on the development of new processes that are compatible with the recycling plastic waste and agricultural waste. Now, interesting, Dr. Nuno mentioned is in his brief biodata that he's determined to finding new and innovative processes that can close the gap between today's reality and the future of circular economy. His goal is really to bring new and economical solutions that turn possible the transformation of rail waste into new high-value products. Very interesting. Dr. Nuno, I'm delighted to pass the floor to you.
So thank you very much for inviting me to this talk, which I think is really important if we want to move forward to a more circular economy. So I'm going to start by sharing, okay. And there you go. Can you see the?
Yes, perfect.
The PowerPoint? Yeah. Okay. So, so the objective here today is just to give you a really brief overview on current trends in terms of chemical recycling of plastics, what processes are out there. So as I'm pretty sure you've seen, just to give you a little bit of background, this waste management pyramid, and we all know, and it has been discussed quite a lot here even today, that obviously we should not use or not produce waste or then reuse the waste that we produce. Obviously, this is not often an option, and this is why we're having this talk today. So when we have produced this waste, we have basically 4 options what we can do with this. So we can either mechanically recycle it, chemically recycle it. We can do, for example, incineration, or we can just throw it into the environment, which is something that we want to avoid, obviously. If we look in terms of environmental impact, there's a preference to doing mechanical recycling to chemical recycling, and then incineration, as mechanical recycling typically produces less CO2 emissions. However, chemical recycling cannot be applied to every plastic type, and it is often not an option. That's why chemical recycling rates worldwide are actually so low. So chemical recycling stands at the second best option. So when we're talking about chemical recycling, there's basically 3 strategies. So the first one being solvent extraction, where you have your waste and you use a solvent to selectively extract your polymer that you can then use to make other products. You can do depolymerization, where you have your plastic waste and you break down your plastic into the original monomer, so chemicals that you can then use to make polymers again, which have the same exact properties of virgin plastic. Or you can transform your polymers into something else that is not the original polymer. So you'll be doing, which these can be either new materials, as a few examples have been given today, or for example, fuels or energy. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a few examples of companies that are developing technologies for each one of these strategies and give you an idea on what level of readiness their technology is. So how close or how are they in terms of commercial application by giving their technology readiness level, knowing that 7 or above, we're already talking about some level of commercial application. So starting with solvent extraction. So here the principle is quite simple. So you have your mixed waste that you mix with the solvent that will specifically target one of the polymers in that waste, often PVC. And then that polymer is dissolved and separated from the remaining of the waste, which is left mostly untouched. And then by the addition of an anti-solvent, you recover your polymer clean. Then you regenerate the solvent and the process continues. So this strategy is actually mainly applied to nowadays to composite materials, in particular textile composites. And here you have the examples of 2 companies that apply this already at early stages of commercial application, specifically while recovering PVC and PET from textile materials. This type of technology has the advantage of being a simple concept, but not requiring repolymerization. So it's a little bit similar to mechanical recycling. It can be applicable to PVC, which, as you know, is a very problematic waste stream. And it also permits the selective separation of different polymers or polymers from materials. For instance, if you have a textile that has both cotton and, for example, PVC, you can separate PVC from cotton and recycle the fibers independently. Obviously, it also presents quite a few challenges. For example, if you have low molecular weight molecules in your waste, either grease or some kind of other let's say, garbage. And if you have other polymers, traces of other polymers can be carried over into the final product, which lowers its quality. And if you have a degraded polymer to start with, it is also be carried over to the final product, which also degrades the quality of the product. So in order to be using this technology, you really need to choose a little bit of the type of waste that you can target. Moving now into depolymerization. So here the principle is to reverse the polymerization reaction. So because we're reversing a reaction, we actually need to look a little bit into the chemistry of the polymer. And broadly, we can separate polymers in 2 groups. So the first one, which we have polymers which have an heteroatom, meaning that we have either oxygen or nitrogen in the polymer structure chain. And these are, for example, polyesters like PET, polyamides like nylon, or polyurethanes. And on the other side, we have polymers that only have carbon in the polymer chain, meaning like polyolefins, like polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene. So when you have the first case, so the ones that have the heteroatom in the backbone, you can, because you have these atoms there, you can actually selectively break the chain into the monomer and recover the monomer quite easily with high selectivity. And this is why there's been a significant increase in technologies specifically targeting PET, which is one of the main polymers produced worldwide. And it's easily to break down into the monomer itself. There's also a couple of companies that have been working on polyamides, specifically nylon 6 and polyurethanes as well. I'm going to give you a brief later on PET as well, a little bit more detail. On the other side, when you have polyolefins, you can break them down into something that is closer to the monomer. However, this is typically unselective, meaning that you have a little bit of the monomers. For example, ethylene will be polyethylene will be having ethylene, but then you have a bunch of other things that are not that monomer itself. So in order to recycle these plastics chemically, what is typically done, and is actually starting to get more interested nowadays, is converting these plastics into a refinery stream called naphtha, which is a little bit similar to gasoline, through pyrolysis, and then feeding this naphtha into the refineries, where through standard methods processing the refinery, convert this naphtha into monomers that then you can use to produce polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, and so on. So here are some examples of companies that are doing plastic pyrolysis already at the commercial level. Actually, there's quite a few more, so these are just a few examples. I know there's someone that is going to talk about this a little later on, so I'm not going to go much into detail. Coming back into PET depolymerization, so this is one that's seen significant attention in terms of technology development. You have mainly three strategies to break down PET into monomers, which gives the three monomers that can be used to produce PET commercially nowadays. So you have to react PET, for example, with water. So this would be hydrolysis. You can react PET with ethylene glycol, which would be glycolysis. And then you can react PET with methanol. So each one of these strategies has advantages and disadvantages. With hydrolysis, you're using water to react with PET, which is quite cheap and is a green solvent, so it's quite environmental friendly. However, as you know, PET doesn't interact very well with water because it's used to make water bottles. So in order to make it react, we actually need to use high temperature and then high pressure, and typically we end up with the corrosive middle, which adds up to the cost and challenge of this process. If you want to work at lower pressure, then you can use glycolysis, reacting PET with ethylene glycol. This requires a catalyst, but the main challenge of these strategies is that you obtain a product that is quite difficult to purify. So if you have lots of contaminants in the initial feedstock, and these are carried over into the product, you need to do complex separation in order to obtain your pure monomer, which is essential then to get PET at the end. And finally, if you react PET with methanol, you end up with a monomer that can be quite easily purified through distillation, which is a very old process in chemical engineering. Most factories use it. And it's a very well-established technology, so it's actually very easy to purify this monomer, which is a big advantage. However, this technology also has some disadvantages. The main one being that DMT actually has a lower market value than the other monomers that I just referred. This mainly due to the fact that the process that converts DMT into PET is being discontinued worldwide, to give preference to the other monomers. So here are some examples of companies that are developing technology. So this is not an extensive list, so just some examples in each one of these strategies. So as you can see, all of them are already at commercial level or very close to commercial implementation, with hydrolysis technologies being a little bit behind, but we're getting really close to commercial application. Moving now in terms of transformation. So here the idea is to transform polymer into some other high-value products, which is not the initial polymer itself. So typically here you have two strategies. So either you convert this polymer into energy and fuels, and this is something that is already actually quite developed because it builds on technologies that were initially developed for biomass conversion, which has been seeing development for a few decades now. And typically here we're talking about pyrolysis, which converts these plastics into fuels, gasification, which converts these polymers into a gas that can then be transformed into energy, fuel, hydrogen, or alcohols. I know there's someone later that is going to talk about liquefaction, which would maybe could be also introduced here as a way of converting these polymers into energy or fuels. So because these technologies are already seeing quite a lot of development for multiple reasons, these are the ones that actually seem a more significant commercial relevance. So that the ones that are more represented in terms of commercial application, with the exception of conversion of plastics into alcohols, which even though the technology exists, it's not actually applied. And then we can convert our polymers into other materials and chemicals. So, so there's been some examples mentioned actually today with converting plastics into roads, for example. But typically, so there's obviously quite a lot of options because we're converting plastic materials into something else. But most of these options are at R&D level, so there's not a lot of commercial relevance for this actual strategy. So I'm going to give you a few examples of things that are being done. So it's not, again, an exhaustive list, and you can, if you look into literature, you can find a lot more examples. So the first one being some work that is being developed at the University of Queensland now on the conversion of PVC waste into carbon fibers by combining the solvent extraction process that I just explained to you in the beginning and the new technology to convert PVC fibers into carbon fibers. Another example is a company from New Zealand that converts plastic waste into adhesives, which then they use, for example, to recycle concrete as well as plastics in order to make new materials. Another example of something that we're starting to develop in a collaboration with the University of Queensland is the conversion of plastic waste into acids, which can then be fed to bacteria in order to make biopolymers, which are biodegradable and biological as well. And other examples are the modification of PVC waste and polystyrene waste to capture, for example, CO2 from the environment or from flue gas, for example, and the production of really high-end materials from polyethylene and polypropylene, like carbon nanofibers. So just to give you a brief summary on each one of these strategies. So you have solvent extraction, that is a very simple concept and is applicable to PVC, which tends to be a very problematic waste. However, again, this is sensitive to contamination. So if you have some things that can be carried over into your final product and degraded as the quantity of recycling cycles go. Then you have depolymerization. And when specifically applied to heteroatom compounds, you have unlimited recycling cycles, which is basically, let's say, the dream of recycling with high selectivity from the waste polymer into the virgin polymer again. So these are mostly established technologies or technologies that are very close to commercial application. However, these are limited to only a few polymers, mainly PET with also nylon-6 and polyurethanes. And this is mainly because each individual polymer needs a complete development of process. So each one of them has a different chemistry, which means each one will have a different process. And so going now into transformation, so basically have pyrolysis and gasification, which I think we can also include here liquefaction, which are commercially applied technologies that can deal with multi-component streams, specifically if you're producing, for example, fuels. They are ideal for polyolefins because these already have a structure that is very close to fuel production. They're also a little bit sensitive to the presence of heteroatoms. For example, if you have something that has oxygen, if you have something that has nitrogen or chlorine, these will be carried over into the final product, and then you need to upgrade. You need to do an extra step of upgrading of that product if you want to produce, for example, fuel. And again, typically you don't produce the initial polymer, only if you do another process later in order to transform whatever product that you got from either pyrolysis or gasification. And finally, transformation of plastics into materials, other materials and chemicals. So here you have multiple opportunities that can produce high value products. Most of them are actually at lab scale stage, so not a lot of development. And again, you don't produce the initial polymer, which would be the ideal scenario in terms of a circular economy. So thank you very much for your attention. I think we'll go into questions later. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Nuno, for the very informative presentation. You gave us a very detailed overview on the different strategies there are out there and the technicalities that are involved in terms of advantages, disadvantages, and how efforts are towards commercializing some of these technologies that are available. So thank you once again. We'll keep the discussion to the end of the session. We'll move on to the next presenter, Dr. Kieran Travis, who is the project leader for advanced recycling at Kinos. He leads Kinos' efforts to integrate advanced recycling at its petrochemical facilities in Melbourne and Sydney to provide a solution for end-of-life plastics in Australia and create circular plastics for high-value applications. He joined Kinos in 2017 and was previously the market segment manager for pipe dairy molding applications. Sorry. Jeroen holds a PhD in chemistry from the University of Amsterdam. His areas of expertise include polymer chemistry, its commercial applications, and the circular economy. With that brief introduction, I pass the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cheryl, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak here. It's an honor. I think we've had a really great session over the past 2 days that I've been able to follow, and yeah, I'm happy to contribute here today on the efforts that we're doing at Qenos with regards to advanced recycling. It's a little bit of a dual purpose that we have. I mean, we're part of the problem as a virgin plastic manufacturer, but I do believe that after you've seen my presentation, you can see that we can also be part of the solution, and that's very much what we are aiming for. So let me try and bring up my slides. If I can get that to work. Is that coming through?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, talking about the Qenos Circular Plastics Project. So before I go into that, let me just briefly say who is Qenos, because probably not known to most of you. So Qenos is Australia's sole manufacturer of polyethylene, producing in Australia for over 60 years. And as said in the introduction, we have production facilities both in Melbourne, which is the Altona plant, and in Sydney, in Botany. And our base business is based on converting ethane feedstock, which is a byproduct from natural gas, really. And we're fully kind of linked up with pipelines to the production wells, either in the Gippsland Basin of Victoria for the Melbourne plant, or the Cooper Basin in South Australia for the plant in Sydney. So we crack the ethane into ethylene, and then we polymerize the ethylene into polyethylene, and which goes into a wide variety of different products, packaging, pipes, poly tanks, you name it. And so we supply about 60% of the domestic demand of polyethylene in Australia. Importantly, the facilities that we operate, they comprise steam crackers and ethylene polymerization infrastructure. And this is not unique in the world, certainly not, but it is unique in Australia. And we believe that these facilities are absolutely critical to enable a plastic circular economy for advanced recycling, because they're actually able to take hydrocarbon feedstocks that at the moment are fossil based, but could potentially be plastic waste derived, and then convert them back into the original polymer that they're made from. And so how we plan to do it, I'll show you in the next slide. But before that, just highlighting, and I think we had Meredith here from APCO, who's spoken to you already around Australia's targets for packaging circularity by 2025. So I'm not going to repeat all of that. I would just like to highlight that in terms of the recycled content, there's a 50% average target, but that's across all packaging. But there are specific sub-targets for PET, HDPE, and polypropylene and soft plastics that are highlighted here. So generally targeting 20% for plastics. And yeah, that is still actually quite a long road to go if we're looking at the most recent data. So we're basically seeing that the conventional recycling techniques alone are not really able to close the gap for recycled content in plastics. So the latest figures that have been published by APCO sit around 3% recycled content for plastics packaging. And I think it was mentioned already earlier and during the whole all the sessions that there are real success stories for mechanical recycling. I think this includes your PET water bottles that can go back bottle to bottle. And that is a key driver, and a lot of investment is happening in Australia to actually scale that up further. Other examples are milk bottles. So Australia has HDPE milk bottles that are unpigmented. This is a very well-defined stream that can be separated quite easily at MRFs, and then can be upgraded again to food-grade polymers and going back into the original application. And we're seeing investment and this being rolled out and scaled up in Australia at the moment. So that's great. And then also, of course, non-food packaging. There are more and more examples of where this is being done. However, we believe in order to kind of close the gap to the target where we want to be, I mean, from going from 3% to 20% in terms of tons, that means 210,000 tons of plastics, recycled plastic content into the applications. We believe in order to get there, you need to widen the scope and also look at other applications. And so that includes soft plastics, which are very problematic to recycle by conventional methods, and also the sort of pigmented and multi-layered materials that become more and more difficult if you want to bring them back into the original applications. And so that's potentially where advanced recycling and chemical recycling techniques can come in to start closing those gaps. So advanced circular plastics recycling is, in our view, complementary to mechanical recycling in diverting plastic waste from landfill and reducing the reliance on fossil fuels. So in the middle of this diagram, you basically see the conventional value chain for plastics, the linear economy, where we go from a fossil hydrocarbon feedstock, and the example that we use here in Australia is to use ethane gas, but this can also be naphtha, to a polymer production, and then we sell our product to our customers who create plastic products and packaging, and especially in terms of packaging, it becomes waste after very short use and life. After which, I think in Australia at least, we have a reasonably good collection system. However, what happens after the collection, I think there's a lot of work to do with over 80% of plastics ending up in landfill currently. There is mechanical recycling, and so mechanical recycling really takes it back to go back into plastic product manufacturing through kind of washing and upgrading steps. And I think, as we have heard already in the session, now advanced recycling, and obviously advanced recycling is a kind of a wide group, and I think the previous presenter has done an excellent job in providing the breadth and depth of advanced recycling. What we're talking about here is pyrolysis-based advanced recycling that is able to kind of break down these plastics back into hydrocarbon feedstock that then can be used to produce plastics again. Importantly, you need these polymer production assets in order to do that. And I think here, so not every country has that. For example, New Zealand doesn't have any polymer manufacturing, so they wouldn't have this road open. If I'm thinking about Malaysia, Malaysia very much has a very well-developed polymer industry, and certainly would have these options open to them if, I guess, the scale can be built on the back end here of the system. So what is the Qenos Circular Plastics Project? So our aim is to set up 100,000 tons facility to get currently unrecyclable plastics back into circular polyethylene. And when I say circular polyethylene, I mean a circular recycled content product that has absolutely identical properties to virgin resin. So there's absolutely no loss of quality. And as I said, to make that happen, you need the sort of infrastructure on the right, cracking and polymerization, and this is infrastructure that we already have. But obviously, this is not a job you can do by yourself, and collaboration is absolutely key to achieve this. So starting with basically mixed plastic bales that are not suitable for mechanical recycling, there's many different steps that need to occur in order to get back to a circular polyethylene. And so the partnerships we've taken in this approach for the feasibility study that we launched earlier this year were with Cleanaway, which is Australia's leading waste management company. They operate collection systems, municipal recycling facilities. They also operate mechanical recycling facilities, so are very well integrated into the waste value chain. And in the feasibility study that we're doing, they're basically looking at the mixed plastic bales and how to upgrade them into a feedstock for a pyrolysis process. And so that means removing unwanted plastics, of course, sourcing sufficient volumes of the plastics. And yeah, you have to remove things like PET, PVC that can be an issue when you go into a pyrolysis process. So the real kind of conversion of the waste plastics into hydrocarbon feedstock occurs in the pyrolysis part. We've partnered there and selected Plastic Energy, who was already mentioned before, as a real leading technology in that space. They have already operating plants doing this over in Europe, in Spain. They are supplying what they call a tech oil. So they don't call it pyrolysis, they call it thermal anaerobic conversion. They're supplying tech oil already to petrochemical manufacturers in Europe, producing circular plastics, which are going into real products. So for us, I mean, TRL was mentioned. For us, it was absolutely critical to partner with a company who has the operational experience and to invest into a technology that is actually operational and proven. And so the concept is to operate that as a joint venture together with Cleanaway, but integrate it onto Qenos's existing sites in Melbourne and in Sydney. Now, importantly, in order to use this tech oil as a feedstock, using it in its current form at the scale that we intend to, is unfortunately not possible without a further purification step. And I think the previous speaker already alluded to that. So despite some of the sorting that you're doing here at the front end, there are still heteroatoms like nitrogen, a little bit of chlorine, silicons, and so on that need to be removed in order to make it suitable as a feedstock and equivalent to a NAFTA specification. And so here we selected Axens, who is a leading technology provider on hydrotreatment. And so we would be integrating a hydrotreatment prior for the naphtha basically to go into our steam crackers to generate ethylene and to make polyethylene. So as I said, the next steps are sort of already, we have been doing that and we can integrate this into our existing facilities to then make what we call Alkanu, which is a circular polyethylene. And that has identical properties to virgin resin. And so it's really a drop-in replacement to achieve recycled content targets for our direct customers, the converters, but also the brand owners that are placing actually packaging and food into the market. So the material that is produced this way is a food-grade material. It can go in basically any type of polyethylene grade that we're producing. That includes LDPE, linear low density, metallocene, and high density PE. We can, because of all the deep conversion and all the purification steps that we're taking, we can provide the regulatory compliance, the food contact compliance for the material. It will have the same batch to batch quality as a virgin material. And importantly, it has a traceable recycled content using a mass balance approach and a full chain of custody method. So we're currently undergoing the certification for ISCC Plus, who can basically then track the recycled content from the source to the final product. CO2, as mentioned, is an absolutely critical element of this. Based on research that and studies that have been published mainly around the European model, we're seeing about a 40 to 50% reduction compared to virgin polyethylene, especially when considering waste to energy as the alternate disposal method for the waste plastics. We are currently undertaking a life cycle assessment of our own together with CSIRO in Australia, and to look what does this look like in the Australian context, which is of course different. And I think it is important when you're doing life cycle analysis to always look at the exact context and location geography where you plan to implement this technology. And so we expect those results to be ready in later this year, before the end of the year. So just to wrap up and to give you a flavor of where we are at the moment, the target is very much to get a circular polyethylene online in 2025 to meet the national packaging targets. Obviously, I'm not yet at the stage that I can say, yes, we have taken final investment decision and this is certainly going to go ahead. So this year, 2022, was very much about establishing these really important technology and feedstock partnerships and doing the feasibility study, to which we're kind of coming towards the back end of. And importantly, at the moment, very much testing and pressure testing all the commercials around it, because as you can imagine, this is a real major development. We're talking about several hundreds of millions of dollars. So that you need to be very certain of your feedstock, the processing cost, and also what the end market, what the end price is going to be. And so that's what we're working on at the moment. Hopefully we will be able to take the next step to go into front-end engineering and design towards the end of the year or early next year, and then aiming for a final investment decision at the middle of next year, after which we can go into detailed design and construction and a startup hopefully in 2025. So I would say follow this project. We have a website, alcanew.com. I'll put it into the chat later, and yeah, happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session later.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jerome, for the presentation. I must say this, some of the points that you have mentioned in your presentation relates very closely to what the Malaysian government thinking is really derived towards. What should be the technology? How do we move towards that? And considering that we have now the roadmaps, the action plan that identify the need for advanced plastic recycling, the right technology and related actions towards 2030, which is not that far off. I think this very much relates to what we are intending to do as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Jerome, for that. One of the key points that you mentioned in your presentation, again, very interesting. You did make a point on conventional recycling techniques alone will not be able to close the gap for recycled content. I think it's very crucial, and the ambitious targets that you've got in Australia as well. That is definitely something that I see is a cross-board between Malaysia and Australia, and how we should be moving towards that. So thank you once again, Dr. Jerome, for that. We'll keep the questions to the end, and I will call upon the participants to, for those that are interested to ask questions to the panelists this afternoon, please do use the Q&A function and we'll pick it up from there. We now move to the last presenter for session 4, Ms. Andrea Paulson. Ms. Andrea is the Marketing Director at Technology Development Company, Lisela Holdings, and its subsidiary Advanced Recycling Australia, ARV. She joined Lisela in 2015 and has over 15 years of experience in a variety of marketing, communication, and business development roles in low-carbon technology, renewables, and recycling. Andrea is on the ARV leadership team, developing the first commercial-scale advanced recycling facility in Australia to utilize Lisela's pioneering catalytic hydrothermal reactor platform. Ms. Andrea has got a BA with honours from the University of Sydney and a graduate diploma in business marketing. With that brief introduction, I pass the floor to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that introduction. Is my audio okay? I sound echoey, but I might just turn myself down here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me along today. Thank you, Craig, for the invitation. I've enjoyed listening to the other speakers. I think we'll be having a very interesting discussion as well in the panel. So I will move on to my presentation. Let me just share my screen. Just one moment. Here we go. And just pop back to the beginning. Here we are. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you for having me along today. And I think given that a lot of the market information and some general information on chemical recycling has already been shared, that I will focus on Licella's technology and our project here, and hopefully some of that will be relevant to the discussions in terms of the Malaysian context as well. So just a little bit about Licella firstly. So we are a technology development company. We have developed a form of advanced recycling, which is a form of hydrothermal liquefaction called the CAT-HTR platform. CAT-HTR stands for Catalytic Hydrothermal Reactor. We use supercritical water, so water under high pressure and high temperature, to control the conversion of plastic to oil. And the platform also works for biomass. So we work in both the biomass and plastic space. In ANZ, which is what we'll be focusing on today, Licella is taking the lead on the commercialisation of the platform under Advanced Recycling Australia. Our first facility is already under development in Altona, Victoria, so I've got a slide on that towards the end of the presentation, which I'll talk about. Globally, so we work with a global network of partners outside of ANZ. We have a partnership through Mura Technology, who are commercializing our platform. So our CAT-HTR technology is at the core of Mura's advanced recycling processes. The first facility to utilize CAT-HTR is under construction in the UK and will be operational next year, which is really exciting. Mura have a global partnership with KBR for the engineering of the facilities, which we also will be utilising in Australia, and also a global alliance through Dow. So I've got as well a bit of a worldview of the facilities under development, but just as I guess as provide context of how we operate, we are taking the lead commercially in ANZ, and then outside of ANZ it is through Mura, which we provide technology support at our New South Wales facility on the New South Wales Central Coast. For biomass, we have a partnership. It's actually a joint venture with the Canfor, one of the largest pulp and paper companies globally. The first plant is fully funded in North America, and we have a global alliance with Shell, Catalyst and Technologies. And then we also looking at new market opportunities. So within, so globally, so advanced biomaterials, and that again, Licella is taking the lead on. And as I mentioned, Licella Technology Development, we have a large-scale pilot plant, a small commercial plant on the New South Wales Central Coast, which has been operational for 14 years. We've invested over $120 million into our platform, and so where we are today is commercial ready, and the first commercial plants are being constructed. So I think the circular economy is obviously something that is is core to these discussions today. And what we want to do is we want to, I think as a few of the speakers have said, plastic in itself is not necessarily bad. It's the way that we use it and throw it away. So if we can recirculate that plastic and we can attach a value to it, we don't have the incentive to throw it away and discard it after a single use. And so this was a great paper that came out in 2019 from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which essentially showed that without a circular economy, we will never reach net zero carbon. And that's because half of the emissions, 45% of the emissions, global emissions, are from the products that we use every day. If we only address energy and the emissions from energy, we'll only ever get halfway there. So we need to look at things like plastic, because without that, we will never get to net zero carbon. So it's more than just a discussion on plastics, it's a discussion on overall our lower carbon future. So I think the circular economy is critical to the sustainability of our future. And really, I mean, the exciting thing is we have the technology. We just need to scale it. Everything that we currently make from fossil oil could be made from plastic waste, and advanced recycling or chemical recycling makes it possible. Now, as I say, Licella, what we have is the next generation of advanced recycling, hydrothermal liquefaction, which uses water. And there's a number of advantages to that, which I'll cover in a moment. But just to give you some examples of some of the types of plastics that we have processed through our facility. So ocean-bound plastics, so from left to right, also plastics from product stewardship schemes, so mixed multi-layered plastics we have in Australia, as well as curbside recycling. We have return to store programs where consumers can bring back their flexible soft plastics to supermarkets, and then that gets collected, so product stewardship scheme. And then also, of course, plastics which are rejected from the recycling facilities, so MRF rejects, which are often highly contaminated, very difficult to mechanically recycle. And so there's an example as well. So you can see the image of our large-scale reactors at a small commercial plant there, and an example of the oil which we actually produced last year as part of a pilot trial, which I'll cover. And so, you know, we have had a bit of talk about chemical recycling and advanced recycling, and it has come a long way. So pyrolysis has sort of been the gold standard up until now, that converts solids, plastic into a liquid through heating in the absence of oxygen. And so that has really been sort of the predominant mode of chemical recycling. And then gasification as well, which requires higher temperatures, which converts to gas and then stitches it back together. And then hydrothermal liquefaction is sort of the more modern approach. And so we really patented our first continuous process in the early 2000s. And we use, as I mentioned, the key difference is the use of water. And what that does is it provides a more controlled chemical process, a more efficient process. We can utilize lower temperatures, and we create a very high yield of high quality oil. So it's the next generation of advanced recycling, and it was specifically developed in a carbon constrained world. So our key focus, and the reason that people like Shell and Dow are working with us, is that it retains the highest quantity of carbon from the initial feedstock to the oil. So yes, the technology selection is important. I'm not going to dwell on the technical side too much, but this, I guess the point that this diagram is making is that the way in which the chemical conversion happens in hydrothermal liquefaction on the left compared to pyrolysis. So with hydrothermal, the use of supercritical water, we're able to get a more controlled heat transfer, so we can heat from the inside out, which means that we can actually use lower temperatures, and we don't get a charring reaction. So we don't get the conversion of plastics to solids, which can happen when we're heating from the outside in. With pyrolysis, it is prone to charring because you have a less controlled reaction. So what supercritical water is water, which is a green solvent at above the critical conditions there. So you can see, above these temperatures and pressure, water does rapidly diffuse through and depolymerize the feedstock. And we use a catalyst as well, but water is the primary. And there's quite a few advantages to using water in the process, which I'll cover. So using water to control the conversion of plastic to oil, we get a very high yield of oil, which is suitable to drop into existing refinery infrastructure. So we don't need to do a lot to it. It also is a very efficient and scalable process. We can process a very wide range of end-of-life plastics without needing to sort those plastics, without needing to do much to it in terms of pre-treatment and cleaning. So we can handle quite a high degree of contamination, which sort of more traditional approaches to chemical recycling would struggle with. And again, here are some examples of plastics which we have processed and we can process. MRF rejects, return to store, plastics from agricultural applications, from household collection programs. So in Australia, we do have not nationally, but we have some pilot programs of household collection where households actually put plastics into a bag, tie that bag up, that goes in the recycling bin, and then that's manually separated at the material recovery facility and utilised as a feedstock for various applications, including advanced recycling. So I've got one of those here. So we actually, oh, you can't see it because I've got the filter on, but you'll just imagine it. We utilised that as one of the feedstocks for our pilot KitKat, which I'll cover in a moment. Also, plastics from C&I applications. I mean, that we're not very good at collecting these in Australia, but it's a huge opportunity. So commercial and industrial plastics, you know, they're not as sexy and exciting as KitKat wrappers, but, you know, there's a huge opportunity there to do better with them. Plastics that contaminate paper recycling facilities. So, you know, a lot of the time you get your newspapers and your magazines and they're wrapped in plastic. So there's a huge amount of plastic that ends up in paper facilities. And then, of course, you know, there are plenty of other examples, but here is just one with the paint tub, other difficult to recycle plastics. And like the other speakers have said, we very much view mechanical recycling and advanced recycling as complementary. We don't envisage new mechanical recycling facilities to impact advanced recycling and vice versa, because we are specifically targeting plastics which are difficult to impossible to mechanically recycle, and we would be an adjunct to these plastics, which really do have a lack of other solutions. And in terms of looking at the waste hierarchy, we believe it's really critical to invest in recycling infrastructure in line with the waste hierarchy. So everything that can be mechanically recycled should. Then advanced recycling comes in to help close that gap, particularly when we are looking at contaminated mixed streams and where it's not economically viable to sort those plastics by polymer type. And then, of course, everything that can be chemically recycled should be before we consider energy recovery, which, you know, we did some modelling which showed that converting plastics into oil with the CAT-HTR creates double the value with half the emissions compared to incinerating the same amount of plastic for energy. So it's a higher value, lower emission option to energy recovery, and it certainly can provide a high value home to many of these plastics which would otherwise go to waste, and ultimately we want to avoid, because we know that there's a huge amount of leakage into the natural environment, including the oceans. So how does it work? So this is just a very basic infographic to show how our process works, but your plastic is fed into the front end of the process, melted and pressurized. It's then mixed with supercritical water, and that passes through our CAT-HTR reactors. Then from there, we separate the oil and gas. So we get a very high yield of plastic crude, about 85%. The rest is a process gas, 15%, which can be used to back through the process to power our supercritical boiler. So it's a very efficient closed loop process. Generally a higher yield, so the 85% oil. Now, pyrolysis yields will depend on the feedstock that's used. So if they do use a purer stream of plastic, they will get a higher yield, but probably struggle more with the mixed streams of plastics. Hydrothermal liquefaction, so the advantage of heating from the inside out with water is that we don't form a char or very, very minimal charring. We do utilize lower temperatures as well because of that more efficient heat transfer, which again is critical because we want to ensure that we're using the lowest amount of energy possible to get the highest return, particularly when we look at our net zero carbon goals. Cleaner products. The water, utilizing the water, another key advantage is that we can remove a lot of the non-organics in the water phase. So things like chlorine from PVC, if PVC was in the plastic, would report to the water phase. What the result is a high quality oil, which we don't need to do extra treating to. it is utilized in the mass balance, SCC plus mass balance approach as a feedstock in existing refinery infrastructure. And obviously every ton of plastic crude that we use is one less ton of fossil, which, you know, is really the aim in terms of recapturing the carbon that's already above the ground and not digging them more fossil resources out of the ground. We can use a much dirtier, cheaper plastic as well, which is, you know, has huge economic benefits and is a much more real world, particularly when we look at, you know, we're not great in Australia at separating plastics. We don't have the infrastructure set up to deal with plastics locally, particularly when, and I know this has been covered, so I won't cover it in great detail, but, you know, traditionally our recycling and waste system was set up to export. So we don't have a history of doing a lot of sorting here. We just don't have the infrastructure. So a technology which can take a mixed and contaminated feed is really advantageous when you don't have that infrastructure set up. So as I said, it doesn't compete with mechanical recycling, and it is a scalable, modular scalable process. So we did a KitKat prototype. So we worked with companies. It was a collaboration along the supply chain where we wanted to demonstrate that this was possible in Australia using Australian technology at the core. So we are a world leading, but Australian technology, and utilising the Australian supply chain. So plastics was collected through household collection programs and also return to store programs, so through RedCycle and Curbside. That went to a local recycler, IQ Renew, who happened to also be based very close to us on the Central Coast of New South Wales. We converted that mixed plastic into oil through our CAT HTR hydrothermal liquefaction process. That was then sent to the Viva refinery in Geelong and used as feedstock for LyondellBasell to make a food grade polypropylene, which was processed into a film by Tagleaf. And then Amcor produced the wrapper with 30% recycled content. Now, the reason that that Nestle chose that 30% recycled content is because of our APCO sustainable packaging targets. We wanted to basically show that we could meet that, and that was all done locally in Australia, and that was possible because of collaboration along the supply chain. Now, this initiative was really the precursor for our Victorian sustainability feasibility study, which we completed in 2021, which validated that we have the infrastructure within Australia to create these post-consumer recycled resins, which are in high demand, both locally and internationally. Just a couple more slides. I know that we're running over time. In terms of our global footprint, we work with, as I say, outside of Australia with Mura. These are all the facilities that are currently under development with CAT HTR at their core. So in Australia, we have our technology development facility in Somersby. We're also developing our facility in Altona under Advanced Recycling Victoria. And then globally, we have alliances with LG Chem and Mitsubishi, Dow, Shell, KBR. The first plant will be operational in the UK next year. So in terms of what I think we will see for the future of advanced recycling or chemical recycling is in Australia, there will need to be a system-wide transformation. And I think that this will be the case for many markets and probably for Malaysia as well, is that we will just not reach our recycling targets without adding chemical recycling or advanced recycling into the mix. The demand for these post-consumer recycled resins, food grade, far outstrips supply. And so because of this global shortage, we will see a lot of these facilities fast-tracked. And, you know, we're already seeing a huge amount of announcements about new facilities. We had an announcement from Mura and Dow just last night about a facility co-located with Dow's production facility in Germany. And so there's going to be a huge amount of new infrastructure coming online to service the demand in this market. Certification will be critical, so completely agree. In order to justify the premium for this recycled content, we're going through the certification from an ISCC plus mass balance approach. There will also be one of the key initiatives for the ACCC, one of the governing bodies in Australia, is greenwashing. And so it will be a point of entry for recycled content, but there's going to be a huge crackdown on people who are claiming to use recycled content and not, which is good news because it's pushing the industry forward to where it needs to be. Scalability, so I think technology selection and looking at not just because a technology is operational elsewhere doesn't necessarily mean it's the most appropriate for this market. And so technology selection and future-proofing these facilities, a technology which can give you that optionality of feedstock and provide the best returns with the lowest footprint is really important to consider. And as I mentioned, investing in line with the waste hierarchy is critical. So feedstock, advanced recycling should not compete with mechanical recycling. If you have some of the more traditional approaches to chemical recycling, the feedstock stream that they need can be to a point where it almost competes with mechanical recycling. And so we just need to consider that we are appropriately investing in the infrastructure to move the industry forward, and a platform which can give you that potential to evolve over time and pivot to biomass or other end-of-life materials is advantageous. So our facility in Victoria, under Advanced Recycling Victoria, will be the first CAT-HTR commercial facility in Australia. It will use 100% renewable electricity. We're currently in permitting with the EPA in Victoria. We're actively engaged with the community in consultation, which is really critical to us. Initially, we will process 20,000 tonnes of end-of-life plastic a year, and that will rapidly scale on site to 120,000 tonnes of feedstock, which will produce 100,000 tonnes of plastic crude. And that's a huge opportunity for local industry. So that facility will create over 300 jobs in the first 5 years, and it will leverage existing infrastructure. So it's local technology with a global network. And that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for the presentation. In fact, it is a nice conclusion to the panelists this evening on addressing advanced plastic recycling. And you have covered that very well in terms of, we've seen the research, we've seen now the feasibility study, and then moving towards commercialization of this technology. So thank you for that. And that nicely brings us into the discussion session. I do not see any particular questions in the Q&A function, but I've got, there are a couple of minutes to go around all the 5 panelists this evening. And I've got basically one question for all of you to try to take it up and wrap up the dialogue. Now, we see that particularly in Malaysia, there's a lot of discussions on creating effective waste management infrastructures, the investment that should be going into economical collection of, clean plastic streams, as session 3 also pointed out, and other recyclable materials at all levels, looking into the conventional recycling to chemical recycling, and ultimately to waste to energy WTE options for plastic waste. However, we see there are many operational and strategic bottlenecks that we're still facing. And that's where we hope to learn from the experiences in Australia. We've seen all these different technologies that are either in the research level or in its feasibility study, or even at the commercialization level that's already used in the industries and so on. But the question now is, when a country tries to move towards, identifying more advanced plastic recycling towards circular economy, what would be the basic essential points that should be considered when we choose a suitable technology, considering the challenges and opportunities there are? If you can, I know it's a big question, but I also remember when we were formulating the national policy, and the technology part was something that we were saying, should we go for this? Should we go for that? How do we decide? You know, of course, the stakeholder consultations and all those comes into play, but what are the basics for you that, you know, for all of you that has been involved in this and you know, progressing on this area in Australia? What do you think should be the basics? And the second question links back to this. Where are the opportunities that you see could probably be derived by Malaysia from Australia? What are the synergies that we could probably take up from there? So I see Austin, you've raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just think to answer the first question, and in hearing all of the different people speak this afternoon, I think what's really key is that there's not one way to solve the problem. So we're going to need mechanical recycling. We're going to need chemical recycling. We're going to need recycling direct to product manufacturing, like Peter's spoken about as well. And I've seen that process also. And I think that's the key, is that plastic is such a diverse packaging medium. There's so many different types of plastic. The reality is in Australia, we're an incredibly large nation with a very small population. So there's a lot of transport. It's difficult to make that efficient. So I think for me, the standout is that you can't just stick to one technology or one process. You have to really, you have to really foster all of them and try and create an environment where they're all working together and effectively towards the same cause, which I think, hearing the conversation this afternoon, I think we're all trying to work towards the same thing in our own way.
Thank you, Austin. Dr. Sharon, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's potentially a good opportunity for Malaysia, given that I think your recycling infrastructure, from what I understand, is still at quite an early level. You don't have material recovery facilities implemented in many states yet, which actually gives you a great opportunity, because it gives you the opportunity to design it right from the get-go. Whereas I think in Australia we're a little bit hamstrung in a way by having legacy infrastructure that we're dealing with and that we're retrofitting. And the example that I would like to give there is around soft plastics. So we've designed our MRF systems to handle only rigid plastics and paper and glass. The problem is that we basically say, well, if you have soft plastics, you have to just put it into the landfill bin, or bring it back to store, which the Recycle initiative, which is fantastic. I'm doing that, but I know that I'm one of the very, very few people who are doing that. And for us, in our feasibility study, what we see is one of the key challenges actually is to get sufficient plastic waste of the right kind of homogeneity together. And so, yeah, I would say really that design of the front end, the whole system has to work together. And I think in Australia we'll get there. We have new initiatives. I think the Kirby bag was mentioned. These are all things that we can do in order to kind of get that separation at source, and we're retrofitting it. But I think if we had designed the MRFs from the get-go with what we know now, I think we would be in a much more economical and better place. So that will be my sort of 2 cents to the discussion.
Fantastic points. In fact, Dr. Jerome, I do agree there's no one size fit all, as Mr. Austin mentioned, and for a country that's beginning to take this like really seriously, not just at policy level, but now moving into practical implementation, I think it sets the opportunity to move, if I may use the word, in the right direction, and to do it in the right way. So thank you for that. Can I also pose the same question to Mr. Peter? Your insights on this, please.
I think that tyranny of distance will determine what is probably going to be the best solution for any given region. As Austin mentioned, in Australia we have some very large geography, and there is a place for technologies to work on a regional level. And I think that's possibly suited to our technology very well. the higher investment technologies that can do similar, could create value from the plastic waste, could be better suited to the highly populated countries. So I think there's a space for us all, and I would encourage for the Malaysian government to an organisation to look at it and say, well, which one suits you best? There's probably a range of answers, and we've seen a lot of that in today. But I think the tyranny of distance is probably, and population density is probably the key to it.
Thank you, Mr. Peter, for that. Can I also pose the same question to Dr. Nuno, please?
Yeah, so I think one of the main typical challenges when we're doing this more like complex types of recycling is actually to get the amount, has actually been mentioned before, the amount of feedstock and the appropriate type of feedstock. So I actually mentioned quite a lot of different options, but each one of these options actually takes a different type of feedstock. So for example, like pyrolysis and gasification and this type of process are a little bit more forgiving in terms of what you can put inside than, for example, if you're doing depolymerization or something like that. So overall, it depends on the type of waste that you have and what type of product that you want to obtain. It depends also on the market that you have at the end. So you have to consider both options. For example, if you can produce, I don't know, PET, if you have some kind of industry that produces PET, maybe you can target something for that type of feedstock. But if you don't have, it doesn't make any sense to do the polymerization of PET, for example. So I think you need to analyze a little bit the market that you have in terms of what you can use as a product, and then target the type of waste management in order to obtain the products that could be designed for a specific process. So I think you need to analyze the thing as a whole, and there's multiple options in terms of things that you can do. So the options are out there. So you need to analyze what would be best in terms of, I think logistics is the main thing.
Thank you, Dr. Nuno. Those are essential points to consider. Definitely, I would totally agree with you on that. Ms. Andrea, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said in terms of it really depends on how the infrastructure is set up in terms of waste collection and sorting. In Australia, we do have challenges in terms of, there's not a lot of source separation that happens. Overall, there is some emerging, but designing systems that increase source separation do make the processing down the line much easier. Appropriate investment into recycling, so along the waste hierarchy, I think, is where you're going to get most appropriate return on those investments. For chemical recycling, ensuring that the infrastructure that you're investing in is best placed to service the feedstock available. So if you do have mixed and contaminated feedstocks, then a next generation technology like hydrothermal liquefaction, which can handle those mixed contaminated feedstocks, may be a good option. But at the same time, ensuring that there's end markets for that recycled content as well. Investing in technologies which have an end market product which has value attached to it, and sharing that value along the supply chain. So giving people an incentive to want to do the right thing. So when you monetize the plastic and you attach a value to it, then people, we've had a lot of success here with the container deposit schemes because there is that incentive, that immediate incentive to do it. And so from a consumer perspective, a community perspective, having very simple messaging as well is important, because people get confused, and even educated consumers get confused because, and there's been a huge amount of investment in the education towards programs like Recycle and Return to Store in terms of what can go in those bins, and the contamination is really low because of the investment in the education. So anywhere where you need a consumer to do something and you're asking them to source separate, you're asking them to be involved in collecting the plastics and reducing, like that container deposit scheme was incredible in terms of reducing pollution from containers specifically. So I think, making simple education messages, incentivizing people to do the right thing, and just making it simple will set these new recycling investments up for success, because without appropriate feedstock or appropriate systems to collect that plastic and prevent it leaking into the environment, it's almost like a moot point investing in the infrastructure for chemical recycling.
For sure. Thank you so much for highlighting that, Ms. Andrea. I'm going to use one final question which came up in the Q&A chat function. This is a specific question for Jeroen. What do you consider to be the key barrier to scaling AR in Australia and the Kinos project? That is the question posed by Tim.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that really comes back to the feedstock. So our kind of, we know that in Australia, when we're just looking at, there's about 2.5 million tons of waste plastics each year. So I think there's an import and production of about 3.5 million tons. Some of it goes into durable, but there's 2.5 million tons of plastics that are being produced. Most of it is going into landfill. So if you look at that number, you think, wow, there is an infinite amount of feedstock. Pretty much. And so we thought on the outset, taking only 100,000 tons of that should be very easy. But I think as we're kind of stepping through the feasibility study, we're really seeing that is actually probably the largest challenge. And we're really now considering what is the right ramp up to actually get there. I think it is certainly possible to get there, but there's a lot of change that needs to happen in terms of collection, in terms of behavior change and all of that. So there's probably a scaling up to get to that 100,000 tons that we have to consider. And I think that's probably the biggest learning over the last kind of 6 months in our feasibility study.
Thank you, Dr. Jeroen. Mr. Peter, go ahead, please.
I think one thing that is worth commenting on is that we're talking a lot about the existing waste stream, and there is a lot of what you saw source material for each of the technologies that we're talking about already in landfill, and so it could be that landfill becomes the gold mine of the recycling industry in the future. And I think that that is an important factor that to consider when you look at what are your existing stocks of landfilled plastic material that could now or potentially have a value in the not so distant future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter. That I think nicely brings us to the end of this session. I think there's so much more to dig deeper into, but there has been such a rich set of information that we've gathered over the last 2 days, yesterday and today, and linking it back to the first dialogue we had last month in August. We will definitely be in touch with you on further dwelling on some of these points and so on. With that, I have the great pleasure to thank you again, Mr. Peter, Mr. Austin, Dr. Nuno, Dr. Jeroen, and Ms. Andrea for the very excellent inputs at session 4. And I pass the floor back to Mr. Aslam. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharita, for moderating the discussion and fascinating exchange of ideas on this subject. We hope all of you enjoyed this session. For the conclusion, I would like to invite Dr. Craig on behalf of Professor Vicky Chen from the University of Queensland to deliver the closing remarks. Over to you, Dr. Craig.
Thank you, Pak Aslam. Well, yes, I have to concur with Cheryl. It's been a fantastic 2 days, and we certainly have a lot of work, but an enjoyable task ahead of us to pull this together in terms of to make a set of recommendations to both of our governments about how to proceed with the objectives of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Now, it does fall to me to give the official closing remarks on behalf of the university and Professor Vicky and Professor Justin. They're currently at a university function that I can hear just out there, and but they do pass on their regards and their considerations to us all. So officially, it is my pleasure to join the Director General of MEMA, Dr. Sabarin, this evening to represent our two organisations and to close what has been a very interesting and, I hope, useful workshop. Now, in signing the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership in 2021, our two governments committed Australia and Malaysia to explore together how we could address the issue of marine plastic pollution. The collection and management of our waste materials and the recycling of these materials back into the productive economy were highlighted as critical to this purpose. And as you've seen over the last 2 days, there are significant but not insurmountable challenges ahead for both of our countries. It requires investment in terms of time, thinking, and of course, money. And look, these challenges are not just restricted to Australia or Malaysia, they're relevant to the Asia-Pacific region and the world. Our keynote speaker yesterday, Mr. Kieran Kelly, spoke to the global problem. He also spoke inspirationally to the hope and potential of local solutions, but where communities and fisherfolk working together are able to turn a problem that impacted their livelihoods and environment into an opportunity. But the reality is they should not have to swap the harvesting of fish for the harvesting of plastic. Now, one of Aesop's most famous fables was the story of the goose that laid golden eggs. It laid one golden egg each day and made its owners very wealthy. But they grew greedy and killed the goose in order to get all the eggs at once. And I think we all know how that ended. And we're doing the same to our environment. Like the owners of the goose, we're destroying the very environment that sustains us. So we have a moral, ethical, and economic responsibility to stop this problem at source. And so creating a circular plastics economy just makes sense. Now, we've covered a number of different areas over the last 2 days, but obviously no one workshop can address all of the issues or provide all of the solutions. This is a conversation that needs to continue. And I hope with our speakers, we'll continue to be able to engage with you, because the reality is we have a lot to learn and we have a lot to learn from each other. But as Pak Kieran said yesterday, these conversations need to turn into action now and at scale. Terima kasih banyak. Back to you, Pak Aslam.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. And now I am delighted to invite Dr. Sabirin Jaafar, the Director General of the Maritime Institute of Malaysia, MEMA, to deliver his welcoming remarks. The floor is yours, Dato'.
Thank you, Aslam and Cheryl. Honorable guests, speakers, moderators, and participants, salam sejahtera. We have come to the end of this 2 days interactive second dialogue as part of the established Malaysia-Australia dialogue series on combating marine plastic pollution 2022. Thank you for your continuous support in making this endeavor a success. It has indeed been an honor and pleasure for MEMA to work with the University of Queensland, as well as the Australian government and the Ministry of Environment and Water Malaysia, or CASA, to ensure the successful conduct of these engagements with the experts and stakeholders throughout the 2 dialogue sessions we have had towards effectively addressing marine plastic pollution. Over the past 2 days, we covered important aspects in waste handling, material recovery, and advanced recycling through the 4 sessions, which focused on the diverse range of areas, including strategic and policy frameworks, collection and recovery, extended producer and industry responsibilities, as well as contemporary and advanced recycling technology. The strong interest from the stakeholders and industry players is crucial to achieve a conducive and sustainable circular plastic economy, not just in Malaysia, but also in the region. These interactions are necessary for an area such as this, which is undoubtedly transboundary in nature. Ladies and gentlemen, the exchange of ideas through sharing of best practices, as well as experiences from key representatives and experts from the government, academia, intergovernmental organizations, and industry players, have provided us with many recommendations on addressing the issue, which will further fuel MEMA's collaboration with the focal ministry and agencies involved in the implementation of the National Policy and Action Plan on addressing the national priorities. I also believe that this collaboration has further strengthened our endeavors to continue this beneficial partnership with Australia, especially on the sharing of information, best practices, and useful approaches on combating marine plastic pollution at large. Ladies and gentlemen, last but not least, I would like to thank again the University of Queensland and Australian government for the fruitful collaboration. We appreciate all the inputs from the speakers through their excellent and inspiring presentations, and to all of you participants for your continued support. Terima kasih, and I look forward to welcoming you again to our future engagements.
Thank you so much, Dato'. With that, we have now come to the end of this dialogue 2 on waste handling, materials recovery, and advanced recycling. On the behalf of MIMA, I would like to thank you for your participation and support. We will be in touch on the outcome from this engagement, and we look forward to welcome you again in our future programs. Thank you, take care, and goodbye everyone. Jumpa lagi.